Hi there, and welcome to a project course where you'll build and deploy the best React admin dashboard application you have ever seen. I'm so excited for this one. This dashboard application is fully mobile responsive and customizable. You can choose between 6 beautiful theme colors as well as toggle between the dark and light mode. Our admin panel includes 1 dashboard, 3 pages, 4 apps, and 7 fully functional charts. The possibilities of different kinds of applications you can make by using the skills you learn in this course are endless. Without any further ado, let's take a look at what you learn how to build from scratch in this video, and just imagine all the different kinds of applications you'll be able to build on your own. The dashboard includes a beautiful view of all of the most important metrics, such as earnings, recent transactions, sales overview, and more. The first page is the orders table, and it includes a pagination system. The employees page is the second table, and it includes a completely functional search and filtering functionality. And finally, the customers page table is fully editable, which means that you can select multiple rows and delete them, as well as edit each field individually. This is not a specialized dashboard, which means that you can use specific pieces of it for absolutely any app you can think of. That's why I've included 4 apps that are crucial to almost every dashboard. The first app is a fully functional calendar. And when I say fully functional, I mean it. You can drag and drop events and edit the title, location, start and end date, and every single other little detail. I feel like I'm on a TV sales show by saying this, but that's not all. You can even change the calendar's view from day, week, month, and even an agenda list. Isn't that crazy? The second app is a Kanban board. Oh, just like an entire Trello or Jira app right inside of our dashboard. You're gonna learn how to make that as well. Then we have a fully fledged what you see is what you get editor. You can make text bold, you can add images, and essentially modify the text in any way you can think of. And finally, we have a color picker app. Highly useful if you want to allow your users to choose specific colors, for example, to theme their applications. And now the fun begins. You'll learn how to create 7 different kinds of charts. Let's check them out one by one. The first chart is the line chart. You can hover over the lines to get more information on these nice tooltips. The second chart is an area chart. You can click on a specific value to hide or unhide it from the graph. The next charts are classic bar chart and a pie chart. And finally, we have some more custom financial candle charts, great for tracking stocks. And we have a color mapping chart right here. And finally, a pyramid chart. These are charts that you don't really see that often, and if you wanted to develop them, you would spend weeks on trying to achieve that perfect look. Again, the possibilities of different kinds of applications that you can make by using the skills you learn in this course are endless. Users can also collapse the sidebar to view the content in its entirety, and we'll also cover some additional widgets like the shopping cart, the chat, notifications, and a user profile. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, our admin dashboard is fully mobile responsive. As you can see, the sidebar automatically collapses, and if we open it, we can move between all of our pages naturally. It feels like a native mobile application. Alongside building this phenomenal application, in this video, you'll learn advanced React best practices, such as folder and file structure, hooks, and refs. We're going to have many different components in many different pages, so I'm going to teach you how to scale your smaller React applications to a higher enterprise level size. You're going to also learn advanced state management of the entire application using React Context API. And most importantly, you'll learn how to use Syncfusion. Syncfusion is the world's best UI component suite for building powerful web, desktop, and mobile applications. It includes more than 1,700 components for all major platforms. And of course, we'll be focusing on React.js. Developing applications using their components will save you hours of time, and you will end up with a professional and a beautiful production-ready application. All components are responsive by default, so you don't have to do any extra work to make them mobile-friendly. And best of all is that Syncfusion Community License provides free access to all Syncfusion components for individual developers and small businesses. That means that you'll be able to get everything I mentioned in this video completely for free. All of the advanced components are included. Functionalities that would take you weeks or even months can be developed in hours using their components. In just around 30 to 40 lines of code, you can build a very complex calendar, editor, and a chart. Almost all components in our app have been built using Syncfusion. Tables, charts, calendars, editors, and essentially anything you can see here. Everything is super easy to use, customizable, and it's responsive out of the box. Syncfusion is the sponsor of this video, but I wholeheartedly love their software and I would recommend it to every single one of you. I'm gonna definitely use it on my own enterprise level projects. And if you're like me, when I first heard about Syncfusion, you're gonna be asking, hey, but isn't there Material UI, Chakra, or Design? These are also some other UI libraries, right? These UI libraries are good, but they just don't have complex components as Syncfusion does. Syncfusion is simply the one-stop solution to building complex apps faster and, as I've said, completely free for individual developers and small businesses. So enjoy. Once again, I'm so happy I can share this with you and give you a comprehensive tutorial on building the best admin dashboard on the internet. If this video reaches 20,000 likes, I'll create more videos just like this one. So subscribe, like, and let me know what you'd like to see next in the comments. In the end, we'll also deploy the app so that you can share it with your friends, put it on your portfolio, and get a job. Once you deploy it, share it on Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn, and tag us. We'll gladly reshare your posts on our social media channels for the entire world to see. With that said, let's dive straight into the code. As we always do on JavaScript Mastery, we're going to start from bare beginnings, meaning we are right now on our desktop, we can right-click and create a new folder. We can call it something like dashboard. Once you have your folder, you can open up your code editor of choice. In this case, we'll be using Visual Studio Code. The only thing you have to do is simply drag and drop the folder into your Visual Studio Code window. Once you do that, you can expand your Visual Studio Code and you can go to View and Terminal. Visual Studio Code has a great integrated terminal, which we're going to use to set up and initialize our React application. So let's start by running npx create-react-app and then // to create it in the current repository. We can press Y to install the following packages. And this process usually takes just about a minute, so I'm gonna pause the recording and I'll be right back. And there we go. Now, if you open up your File Explorer, you'll be able to see that we have a few files and folders here. The most important folder right now is going to be the source folder, which contains our entire React application. What I always like to do with Create React Apps is completely delete the source folder as it contains some files we don't necessarily need. So just right click and delete it, and then right click right here and create a new empty source folder. We can immediately start by creating some necessary files for every single React application. And of course, the most important one is the index.js file. This is the file where we import React from React, and this is also the only file where we import React DOM from React-DOM. So in here, we hook our React application to the real DOM. What we can also do in here is import app from app, and this doesn't yet exist, but we're going to create it really soon. So just /app. And finally, we can say React DOM.render. And then as the first parameter, we can provide our app, and we can say comma document.getElementById and then root. This is going to make sure to hook our React application to the root div. Now, of course, we use this app, but it doesn't yet exist. So let's go ahead and create it. We can right-click the source folder and click New File, and let's create a file called app.js. Inside of there, we can use a cool little shortcut called RAFCE, which is going to create a React arrow function component with export. If this didn't work for you, that must mean that you don't have the ES7 Plus snippets. So just type ES7 Plus React Redux React Native snippets and install that extension. Then you should be able to simply type RAFCE and get this boilerplate code. Great. So now we have our index.js and our app.js. So now might be a good time to install all of the necessary dependencies that we're going to use for this project. And we can of course do that inside of our package.json. To make your life easier and to make sure that this project works exactly as it is supposed to for years to come, I'm going to give you my package.json. So down in the description, there's going to be a GitHub gist containing all of the code that I'm going to be referencing in this video. So just go to that GitHub gist, find the package.json, and paste it right here. As you can see, this package.json is going to have the project name, version, and it's going to have the exact versions of specific dependencies. This is to ensure that we are working on same versions of dependencies. So even if you're watching this video 2 years after it's been published, it's still going to work perfectly for you. Now, as you can see, we are just using plain React here. We have React, React DOM, React icons, and the React router DOM as well. Nothing major. But as you can see, most of the dependencies are actually coming from Syncfusion. So in here, we're gonna get their amazing calendar, chart, drop-down, grids, inputs, Kanban boards, pop-ups, rich text editors, and schedule components. This is going to make our application the best dashboard on the internet. So the only thing you have to do to install these dependencies is go to View and then Terminal. And finally, you need to type npm install --legacy -peer -deps. This is going to make sure to install only the right dependencies. And finally, we can press enter. This process is going to take about a minute, so while that is running, let's go ahead and set up our styles. What you can do is you can create a new index.css file in the source folder, index.css. Inside of here, you can copy and paste the file, which you can also find in the description. It's going to be a simple file containing the import for a good-looking font. We're resetting the margin and padding on the body, and we're importing Tailwind, so we can use those great Tailwind styling options. The next file we're gonna need is going to be called app.css. Inside of our app.css, we're gonna have some more styles. You can again find these styles down in the description inside of that same GitHub gist. In here, we're just resetting some of the necessary styles and making sure that everything is looking good. And while we were creating those files, it looks like our app has installed. That's great. We'll be able to run it soon enough to check that everything is all right. But before we do that, we just have to set up Tailwind. Tailwind is an amazing CSS framework which allows you to rapidly build modern websites without ever leaving your HTML or, in our case, JSX. Instead of having separate CSS files, you'll be able to use utility classes such as Flex, Padding Top 4, Text Center, and so on to more easily style the components on your website. To install it, we can go through this process right here, but we have already done most of those things by installing all of the necessary dependencies, which were included in my package.json. So just to finalize things, we have to add 2 new files. Outside of the source folder, meaning in the root of our directory, you can right-click right here and create a new file. It's going to be called tailwind.config.js. Inside of that GitHub gist in the description, you'll be able to find this file right here. It's just a quick setup specifying some fonts, font sizes, as well as background colors to make our workflow so much smoother. And the last file we need is going to be also in the root of our directory, and it's going to be called krakow.config.js. Inside of that GitHub gist, you'll be able to find the krakow.config.js file as well, so simply copy and paste it right here. I know we've done a lot of copy and pasting for the start, but that's because it is the start. So we need to make sure to properly set up everything so that our development workflow is as fast and as smooth as possible. Spending this time on the setup is necessary because from now on, we'll just focus on creating the actual code, and that way you won't have to worry about some bugs or inconsistencies. You'll be able to just code along and learn so much. So with that said, I think now we should be ready to actually run our application and see what's happening. You can press Ctrl- or go to View and then Terminal. And finally, you can run npm start. This just ran our application on localhost 3000, and you should be able to see it in your browser. If you zoom in a lot, you can see that we have a small app right here, which means that our app is working. To make sure that Tailwind is properly connected to our application, we of course have to go back to index.js, and we have to import that index.css file. So just above our import app, we can say import, and then in a string, /index.css. That's going to import all the Tailwind utilities. We can also go to app.js, and inside of there, we can import a string ./app.css. There we go. And finally, instead of just typing app in a div right here, let's change this to h1, and let's give it a class name equal to something like underline, as well as text-3xl. This should actually increase the font size, and this should make our text underlined. So let's save it. And if we go back to our app, now we can even unzoom because you can see that this indeed works. Tailwind is connected because the class name of underlined actually applied it. So that's great. Now we are ready to start setting up our file and folder structure. As I've mentioned in the beginning, this is going to be quite a big application with a lot of different components, a lot of data moving around, and with a lot of standalone pages. So it is crucial that we set up the right project structure from the start. And when I say project structure, I primarily mean the file and folder structure and the ways in which we're going to connect these files. So what we can do for start is create a few different folders. All of these files and folders are going to be inside of the source folder. So right-click it and click Create New Folder. We can start with one of the most important folders, and that is the Components folder. Then we're going to have the second one, which is going to be called Contexts. In here, we're going to use our React Context API. And finally, we're going to have one for Pages. Pages are similar to components, but where one component cannot be used inside other components, in case of pages, one page can include, and in most cases will include, more components. There is going to be a fourth folder right here, and that folder is called Data. This Data folder will include many images, as well as demo data that we can use across our entire application. So down below in the description, most likely in that same GitHub gist, you'll be able to find the link to download the zipped data folder. You can unzip it and simply paste it right here. It's going to look something like this. So as you can see, we have a lot of different images of different people that are going to use our dashboard, as well as different product images, from glasses to small cars and watches. And finally, we have a huge dummy data file, which contains absolutely no logic, so don't be scared by it. In here, we just have a collection of different arrays and objects that represent our data. This way, you won't have to worry about writing all of this boring code, meaning simply objects and arrays of different strings, like different positions of elements in specific charts, or some titles, descriptions, images, and so on. Everything is nicely compiled for you right here, and we'll be able to simply import it in different pages inside of our dashboard. This is going to save us so much time, and it's going to make this video so much more educational. I don't want to spend 10 hours of your time for you to type this out. I want this video to be as short as possible, but as you know, with JavaScript mastery videos, that can be a few hours. But during that duration of time, I want you to learn the most you can. I want you to absorb the knowledge that really matters. So with that said, we now have our app.js, our index.js, and we have these 4 different folders, which we're gonna soon fill out with files. Now, let's start with our main file, which is the app.js. Inside of here, we can of course first start with imports. So we're gonna import React, as well as, inside of curly braces, use effect hook from React. We're gonna also import a few things from React Router DOM, and these are browser router, as well as routes, and finally a single route. So these are coming from React-router-DOM. We're gonna also need an icon, so we can say import fi settings, and that's coming from react-icons/fi. Finally, we're gonna import a tooltip component, so tooltip component like this, and that's gonna be coming from add Syncfusion /EJ2-react-popups. There we go. I think that's gonna be all that we need for now. Of course, later on, we're gonna import all of our components and pages into this single file, but for now, we should be good to go. What we can do is focus on the actual structure. So instead of this h1, we can create a div right here. And inside that div, we can create a browser router component. Inside of that browser router, we can have a div, and this div is going to have a class name, flex, relative, and on dark mode, we want to set the bg-main-dark-bg. This is the power of Tailwind. You simply made a div flex, we gave it a position relative, and we set the dark background color. Inside of there, we're going to have one more div, and this div is going to have a class name equal to fixed, right-4, bottom-4, and we can also give it an inline style, which is going to set the z index to something like 1000 to make it appear over all other elements. Inside of there, we can render our first Syncfusion component ever, and that is going to be the tooltip component. Tooltip is going to have its own closing tag, and as props, it's going to accept the content equal to settings, and it's going to accept the position equal to top. There we go. And now inside of there, we can simply create a button like this. There we go. And inside of that button, we can put the icon fi settings as a self-closing icon. Now, to be able to see the changes that we code live in the browser, it might be a good idea to put our browser and our editor side by side. And there we go. I just pulled my editor to the side and we can see this great settings icon on the bottom. It is too small on 100%, but if you zoom it in a bit, you can see it really well. So now we can actually hover over it and you can see this great tooltip. This is the first Syncfusion component that we've used. But of course, we're going to use many more really soon. Now let's style this button just a bit. So let's give it a type, which is equal to button. And let's also give it a class name equal to text-3xl. This is going to make the icon a lot bigger. We can give it a p-3 property or padding-3. On hover, we can give it a drop-shadow-xl. So now if we hover over it, you can see that nice shadow. We can also say hover-bg-light-gray. So this is going to change the background color on hover, something like this. Of course, it's going to look so much better really soon. But now let's just add the text-white color, which is going to make this completely white and invisible. But what we can do now is below this class name, we can provide some inline styles. So I'm going to say style, put an object in there, and set the background to be equal to, and for now we can simply say blue. There we go. Of course, this is not the actual color we want. We want to get the color of our theme. Remember, in the intro, I said that we'll be able to change the theme color of our application. So that is really important here. And finally, we can set the border radius to be something like 50% to make it into a circle. Looking so much better, we can actually zoom out now and we can still see it on the bottom right. And if we hover over it, we can see settings. Looking great. Now, of course, this is a really ugly blue color, but we're going to implement theming soon. So you'll be able to choose between many different predefined colors. Just to give you an idea of how the finished site is going to look like, you can see that right here on bottom right, we have that same icon. And if we click it, a nice sidebar is going to appear, and then you'll be able to change the theme color, and therefore the color of the circle changes as well. So as soon as we implement that theming functionality, we'll be able to change this background dynamically. And that is the only reason why this is written in an inline style and not inside of this class name. Great. Now we can proceed with actually creating the sidebar. So we can go below our tooltip right here and also below this div. There we can check if the menu is currently active. So we can say active menu. If that is true, then we want to render a div that's going to have a sidebar in there. If that is not the case, then we can render again a div, but inside of here, we're going to have a bit of a different sidebar. It's not going to be visible because the width is going to be set to 0. But now, what is this active menu? Well, soon enough, that variable will be coming from our context. But for now, let's simply declare it right here. Const active menu is equal to, and let's set it equal to true at the start. Great. So now we can see sidebar right here. Now let's style these divs just a bit so I can give you a better overview of how that is going to look like. Of course, you can visit the shopee-dashboard.vercel.app and then you can see for yourself. But I'll keep this website right here, and whenever we start implementing a new feature, I'm going to show you what we're trying to achieve with the code that we'll be writing. So in this case, we're of course trying to make this sidebar happen, appear and disappear. So to do that, let's apply some class names to our div. These class names are going to be class name is equal to W-72, which means width of around 18 rem. Then we're going to also make it fixed and also provide the sidebar class name. On dark mode, we're going to set the bg-secondary -dark-bg, and also usually the bg is going to be white. So now this is going to give it just a bit of shadow below. I'm not sure if you can see it, it's barely visible, but after we implement all the styles, it's going to be clearly visible. Now, of course, this sidebar right here is not going to be just a sidebar text. Soon enough, we're going to implement a real entire sidebar component. For now, let's simply leave it as text and keep producing the app.js code. If the sidebar is not active, we can simply set the class name to be equal to w-0, which means width is 0, and also on dark mode, bg-secondary-dark-bg. So now if we switch this to false manually, you can notice that something is not looking right. Let's see. And as you can see, now we lost that sidebar and only the text that's in here is visible. So just sidebar. Of course, this is not going to be existent later on once we implement this component. Now, below this dynamic block of code, we can have a div. And this is going to be a div for our navigation bar. So let's apply some different class names depending on if the menu is currently active. So we can say class name and then make that a dynamic block of code. If the active menu is true, then we want to apply a string that's going to look something like this. Dark bg-main-bg. Usually bg-main-bg, min-h-screen, on medium devices, ml-72, and w-full. So this is if the menu is active. Then if the menu is not active, then we can essentially copy almost all of this. Let's copy and paste it here. We will need dark bg-main-bg. We will need the min screen. And we also will need the w-full, but we don't need md-ml72. Instead of that, we have to have the flex-2. So as you can see, these are quite similar when it is opened or closed. So what we can do is create a template string and then replace all the code that's repetitive. That is a small lesson just in general JavaScript, how to reduce repetitive code. So first, let's find all of the pieces of code that are repetitive. So it looks like everything here, including the w-full. The only thing that's different is the md and flex right here. So inside of the class name, let's create a template string that looks like this. And that template string is going to include all of the shared classes. So everything plus the w-full. So now we got rid of all of this. There we go. And the only difference is the md and flex. So now inside of that template string, we can simply say if menu is active, then apply the md-ml and usually apply the flex2. And this way we saved a lot of code and achieved the same look. Now inside of that div, we're going to have one more div, and that div is going to have a class name equal to fixed. And I know that this might look a bit weird at first, especially if you've never used Tailwind. But Tailwind is really useful and it allows you to more easily write styles. If you have never used it before though, I would strongly encourage you to open up their docs side by side with this editor. And whenever I type a specific style, for example, w-full, you can simply go to their search, type it out, and click right here. This is going to show you exactly what that class name does. For example, w-full is going to take the full width of the div. And there is also a great extension. So if you go to extensions and type Tailwind, there you can find the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. This extension is going to, when you hover over a specific property, give you a full explanation of exactly what CSS styles are applied with that class. So w-full simply sets the width to 100%. So one more time, as I go through all of the class names and I write them out, if something is not familiar, simply pause the video and then copy that class name, paste it in Tailwind docs, and learn what it is about. That's the best way to learn and improve as a developer. With that said, let's create another div inside our current div, and that div is going to have a class name equal to fixed md static bg-main-bg. On dark mode, bg-main-dark-bg. It's going to have a style of navbar and w-full. Inside of there, we can simply type navbar for now, but later on, we're going to use the actual navbar component. Remember, for now, we're just going through the setup of the app.js, and then soon enough, we're going to replace all of these text right here with real components. Now, below this div and below one another div, we can create the main div for routing. So this is going to be an empty div with no class names. And then in here, we're going to have our routes. The routes element belongs to React Router DOM, and it is a container for nested tree of elements that branches to a specific location. So we're going to have different routes inside of there. Each route is a self-closing tag that has a path. In this case, the first one is going to be just / or the home, and then it has the element which we want to render. In this case, the element can be a string of e-commerce. There we go. You can see it right here on the right side. Of course, our elements are not going to be simple strings. Each element is going to be a page on its own. But let's first go ahead and create all of the routes, and then we're going to replace all of these elements with actual pages. I'm going to expand this just a bit. There we go. And then we're going to have the second route. The path is going to be / e-commerce. And then we also want to show the same e-commerce tab like this. This is going to be the home page. So if we expand this up a bit and go to e-commerce, you can see that we have this great view right here. Same thing happens if we just go to /, we're going to show the same component. Now we have to implement the routing for all of the other pages, for orders, employees, customers, and so on. So let's go ahead and add them right away. We can even apply some comments by going above our routes, holding Control, and then pressing /. This is going to be our dashboard. Below, we're going to have something like our pages. We're going to create a self-closing route component, and the first page on our list is going to be called orders, and we can render an element string of orders. Then we can duplicate this 2 times. The second page is going to be / employees, and then it's going to render the employees component, which we're going to create later on. The third one is going to be customers, and the element is going to be customers. We're just following this structure right here. Now we're going to have 4 different apps routes, and then finally 7 different charts routes. So let's make some space. Let's add a comment for apps. And we can simply duplicate one of the routes above. The first app is going to be the Kanban board, that Jira or Trello clone, and it's going to render the same component. We can duplicate this 3 more times. Then we're going to have the editor, and same thing here, editor component. Then we're going to have the calendar, as well as the calendar component. Finally, we're going to have the color dash picker, and also the element is going to be color picker, written together like this. And finally, we can duplicate one route. We can make some space for our charts, and there are 7 or 8 different charts. The first one is line, so we can simply say line right here. And we can duplicate this many different times for every single type of chart. We're going to have the area chart, same thing, area right here, a bar chart, and a bar element, a pie chart like this, as well as the pie element. Then we have the financial chart right here. We have the color dash mapping chart, so color mapping. And we also have a pyramid. chart, pyramid, as well as the pyramid element. And the last one on our list is a stacked chart. So we can say stacked right here. There we go. So now we have all of these different routes. And if we type line right here, you should be able to see a line just barely at the top right corner. Of course, we're going to make this look so much better as soon as we implement these components. So now might be a best time to do that. We can go ahead and finalize the file and folder structure by creating all of the components and all of the pages that we're gonna need throughout this entire application. This will require some grunt work, but it will make our life so much easier later on because we'll be able to just import all of the components we've already created. So with that said, let's add a boilerplate structure for all of our components as well as all of our pages. We can start with the components, of course. Inside of the components folder, we can create a new file called button.jsx. Inside of every new component we create, we're going to run the rafce command, which is going to create a simple file structure. Now we can create a new folder this time inside of the components folder called charts. Inside of there, we can create our first chart called line chart.jsx. Again, simply run rafce. Let's repeat the process for another chart called py.jsx, and again, type rafce. We can keep it going with the spark line.jsx, which is another chart. And finally, we're going to import the stacked.jsx, which is yet another chart. Now we're done with the charts, so you can simply close that folder, and we can proceed with adding new components to the components folder. Below our button, we're going to have our cart.jsx. Again, simply run rafce. Below that, we're going to have the chat.jsx. Again, simply rafce. Then we're going to have a charts header.jsx. And again, you can type rafce. Let's keep things going. We're going to create a footer.jsx and repeat the process. Below the footer, we're going to have our header.jsx. Then below the header, we're going to have our navbar.jsx. Below the navbar, we're going to have our notification.jsx. Below the notification, we're going to have the sidebar.jsx. Just two more left to go. We're going to have a component called theme settings.jsx. And finally, the last component is user profile.jsx. And finally, run rafce there as well. And this is our entire structure of all of the components that we're going to use. Now, to more easily export them, we can create a new file called index.jsx. Below in the description, you'll be able to find the GitHub gist for this index file. And after you copy and paste it here, you can see that we're simply exporting all of the necessary components we just created straight into our entire application. This is going to allow us to simply import them all in one line. Great. Now, just to finalize the file and folder structure, we can repeat the same thing for our pages. There are going to be quite a few pages, so just bear with me. We can do this. But as I've said, this is taking some more time at the start, but as we start coding everything out, it is going to be so much faster because we did this at the start. So let's create our first page, which is going to be called calendar.jsx, and you can also type rafce. Inside of the pages, we're going to also have our charts, which is going to be a folder. Inside of that charts folder, we can create our first chart called area.jsx. Again, rafce. I don't think I even have to mention that anymore because you're already doing this so fast. Then we're going to have the bar.jsx, and again, rafce. we're going to have the next one, which is going to be the color mapping.jsx. After that, we're going to have our financial.jsx. We also need our line chart. So let's simply type line.jsx. We also need the pie chart. So let's say pie.jsx. We need the pyramid. So pyramid.jsx. And finally, we need the stacked.jsx. These are all the charts, and we just have a few more pages to go. So inside of the pages folder, create a new file called colorpicker.jsx. Then we're going to create customers.jsx. And it looks like I forgot to do RAFCE there. Don't forget to do that because then the component won't exist. Then we're going to have the e-commerce.jsx. We're going to also have the editor.jsx. We're going to have the employees.jsx. Finally, we need the Kanban.jsx. And finally, we need the orders.jsx. And as we've done with the components, we can also do the same thing with pages, create a new index.jsx file, and below in the description, in a GitHub gist, you should be able to find a file where we export all of these pages. Now we're done with the entire file and folder structure, and everything from now on will just flow smoothly. So now what you can do is click anywhere in your Visual Studio Code, hold Ctrl or Command, and then keep pressing W to close all of the open files. While doing this, you're going to also notice if some file is missing the RAFCE in case you missed it. So let's close all of them. And yeah, it looks like there are a few where I missed doing RAFCE. So I'm going to add that right now. There we go. And this is going to make sure to close all of your currently open files. Now we have a clean working environment. We can go back to app.js, and now we can import all of these components and pages. So to do that, above our import app CSS, we can say import in curly braces, Navbar, footer, sidebar, theme, settings, and these are coming from /components. Because of that index.js file, we can import everything in one line. And then we're gonna do import e-commerce, orders, calendar, employees, stacked, pyramid, customers, Kanban, area, bar, pie, financial, color picker, as well as color mapping, and finally the editor. And these are coming from /pages. There we go. Now we should have everything we need. It looks like we have a problem inside of our components, inside of the index.jsx file. Let's head there. It looks like that definition for rule import NoScycle was not found. That's because I have this line right here. For you, it's not going to be there. While I was developing this project, I was using ESLint, but now we don't need it since we're going to keep our code clean straight from the start. Great. And now we can see our code as it was. If we go to localhost 3000, we can see e-commerce right here. But of course, we just created these components and we never used them. So now, instead of this sidebar right here, we can simply open a new self-closing component called Sidebar. Nothing is going to change now for the navbar or the sidebar or anything else, because these components are simply a div containing that same text. But this is going to allow us to implement the actual logic inside of each one of these components. So let's simply keep going through it, and let's change all of these text elements to their corresponding components. So we have to do that for sidebar 2 times, for the navbar right here, and then we'll have to do that for every single one of these components. The quickest way to do this is to hold Alt on Windows and then click right after the opening string sign on all of these routes. So simply hold Alt and then click right after the opening double quoted string. So keep doing that for every single element. There we go. And let's repeat that until the end. There we go. And now what you can do is press backspace to remove the first opening sign. Open the curly brace because we need to be inside of there. Open the tag sign like this. Now hold Control and then press the arrow right one more time. Close the curly brace and then press the / and close tag to close the route as well. With this, we have effectively changed all of our strings into components. I know this was a bit of a finger workout and it really tested out your abilities to use keyboard shortcuts effectively, but if this didn't work out for you, simply manually change every single string from this into this. That's going to make it work, and that way we'll have all of our components that we can now jump into and start working on. That was it for our entire setup. Now we have the entire file and folder structure, all of our pages and our components, as well as the app.js done. Of course, we spent a lot of time on the setup and our app is not looking that good. Nothing seems to be visible, but really soon, for the pure fact that we did spend some time on the proper file structure, we'll be able to really easily create our application and start coding right away. Great job on making it through to here, and now the fun begins. And finally, we are ready to start coding out our sidebar. Then we'll be able to see what's happening. But even right now, we should be able to see something. The screen is a bit too white, suspiciously enough. So we can go to Inspect, open up the console, and see that e-commerce is not defined. This here was supposed to be e-commerce with a lowercase c. So let's quickly fix that right here. And right here as well. As soon as we fix that and reload the page, it looks like we still have an error. That's fine. Let's open up the console one more time. And it looks like line is not defined. So let's see if we're importing line correctly. It looks like we are not. So what we can do is under pages, we can add that line import at the end. Looks like I've missed it. Once we add it here and reload the page, we no longer have any errors and we can begin coding out our sidebar. We're going to turn it on by setting true right here. There we go. And we can switch to our sidebar component by holding Control and then clicking the left mouse key. There we go. Now let's drag our editor a bit more to the side and let's begin working on our sidebar. Inside of our sidebar, we first have to have a few imports. We need to import the link component as well as the nav link component from react-router-dom. This is going to allow us to switch between some different pages in our application. So I'm just going to pull this a bit more here, and then we can import a few icons. The first icon that we need is going to be import in curly braces si shop where, and that's going to be coming from react-icons/si. We also need one more, so that's going to be import md outline cancel, and that's going to be coming from react-icons/md. Finally, we need that same tooltip component, so we can say import tooltip component from, that's going to be add Syncfusion /ej2, and then that's going to be React popups. There we go. We're going to also import all the different links, so import links, and this is going to be coming from data/dummy. So this is dummy or demo data. These are all the imports that we need for now, and we can finally start coding out our sidebar. Our sidebar is going to be a div, and more specifically, it's going to be a div with quite a few class names. So we can add a class name property, and we can say ml-3 for margin left, h-screen which means full height. On medium devices, overflow is going to be hidden. Usually, overflow is going to be set to auto. On medium devices and on hover, overflow is going to be set to auto, like this. And finally, PB-10 as in padding bottom. Now, inside of there, we also have to know if the menu is active. That information will be coming from our state context. But since we don't have the context already, let's simply say const active menu is equal to true, just a dummy variable. Soon enough, we're going to make that dynamic. So we can open a new dynamic block of code and say if active menu or active menu end. In that case, what we can do is render out an empty React fragment. And inside of that fragment, we're going to have a div. This div is going to have a class name equal to flex, justify dash between, as well as items dash center. Inside of there, we want to render one link like this. And that link is going to point to just /. It's also going to have an onClick property, which is for now going to be just an empty callback function. We're going to implement it really soon. And it's going to have a few class names. So class name is going to be items dash center. And just before we start typing out the class names, it might be a good idea to already put something in the link so we can see what we're changing. In here, we're going to render out that SI shopware icon. And just next to it, we're going to say Shopee. That's the imaginary name of our component. We can put it inside of a span element like so. There we go. So now if we save this and reload the page, you can see that now we have this full height sidebar appearing on the left side. And this is already looking so much better. So let's continue adding class names to this link. We're going to give it a gap-3 property, as well as ml-3, which is going to push it a bit from the left. It's going to have a mt-4, which is going to push it away from the top. It's going to be a flex container, which is going to make the items appear in a row. It's going to have a text-xl property to make it bigger, and also font-extra bold. We're going to also give it a tracking-tight, like this. And finally, on dark mode, the text is going to be white, and usually text is going to be text slate 900. There we go. So as you can see, using Tailwind can be really powerful. With just a few class names, you can have a great looking sidebar and a link right here. Now, below that link, we want to render a tooltip component. That tooltip component is going to have a content equal to menu, like this. And also, it's going to have a position. And that position is going to be bottom, center, like this. Inside of there, we can render a button. So let's say button. And that button is simply going to have the MD outline cancel self-closing icon. As you can see, it appeared right here at the top right. That's going to close out our sidebar. Of course, it's just a bit too little right now, so let's make it a bit bigger. Let's apply a few properties to our button. We can say type is equal to button. We can also give it an onClick property, which for now we're going to leave to be an empty callback function. Later on, we're going to make it actually close the sidebar. And we can also give it a class name equal to text-xl. Also rounded-full, p-3 for padding. On hover, we want to set the bg-light-gray. Margin top, or MT, is going to be set to 4. It's going to be a block level element. And on medium devices, it's going to be hidden. There we go. So now this is already looking like a great sidebar. Of course, it's not doing anything yet, but soon enough it will. What we can do is below this div, we can create one more div. This is going to be for our actual items. So div right here, class name is equal to mt-10 to divide it a bit from the upper Shopee section. There, we want to loop over our links. And what actually are those links? we're importing them from dummy data. But if you at any point want to check what these are, hold Control, click right here, and as you can see, that is an array with a few objects. Each object has a title and a links property pointing to specific things. Pages points to 3 different links, such as orders, employees, and customers. Each has its own icon. So let's loop over those links. What we can do is say links.map. We're going to have a callback function for each item or each link, and we can have an instant return for each one of those items. Each link is going to be a div, and that div is going to have a class name equal to text-gray-400. It's also going to have margin-3 or m-3 and empty-4, margin top 4, and it's going to be uppercased. Inside of there, we want to render out the item.title. Now, if you save this, you can see that our link headings appear right here, and this is looking so much more like a regular sidebar. So it looks like I've made a small mistake. This class name right here was not supposed to go to this div. This div was just supposed to have key is equal to item.title to make it unique. But this class name was supposed to go on a p element inside of it. So right here, we have a p element that has that item.title inside of it, and then we can render that class name on that p element. Now, below that p tag, we're actually going to loop over the links. So let's open up a new dynamic block of code and say item.links.map. And in here, we're going to get the actual link, and we can have an instant return one more time. So essentially, it is a loop inside of a loop. Inside of here, we're going to render a nav link component like this. And it's going to have quite a few properties. The first one is going to be to where are we pointing? And that's going to be dynamic. So we can render a template string, say / $curly braces, link.name. The key is also going to be link.name since we need to make it unique. On click is also going to be, for now, just an empty callback function, but we're going to implement the logic really soon. And then we need to provide a class name and a style. Now, class name is going to be a bit different from what we usually do. What we can say is class name, and then inside of there, we're going to actually call a function. That function is going to accept a state. So we can destructure, meaning curly braces, and then we're going to get the isActive state for each specific item. And then based on that state, we can render different class names. This is given to us straight by using the nav link component belonging to React Router DOM. What we can do is at the top, define 2 different class names for active and not active links. Let's do that right here by saying const active link is equal to a string. It's going to be flex, items-center, gap-5, PL for padding left 4, PT for padding top 3, padding bottom PB-2.5, rounded-LG, and text-white, as well as text-MD, and finally M-2 for margin 2. Now we're going to have the const normal link right here, and it's also going to be a string. We're going to copy the entire active link and just replace the last few properties. We don't need the M-2. Rather, we're going to add the text-gray-700. Since we're going to make it gray, we don't need this white color right here. We're going to also add on dark mode text-gray-200. On dark mode and on hover, we're going to add the text-black. And just on hover, we're going to change the BG to light-gray. And M is going to be 2 for margin 2. Now we can use these 2 links down below. We can say if is active, then we're going to render the active link. Else, we're going to render the normal link. And if we save that, of course, we cannot see anything yet because we haven't inputted any links right here. So what we can do is inside of the nav link, we can render out link.icon. And below that, we can render a span element that has a class name equal to capitalize. And inside of there, we can render the link.name. There we go. So now if we save that, you can see we have these amazing list items in our sidebar, which is automatically scrollable. And now we have these great sections or headings. And if you actually hover over the link, you can see that we get this nice list item. This is looking great. And again, the reason we made it so simple is because we're using Tailwind and we're simply inputting all the specific class names right inside of our code. Great. Definitely the fact that we had this dummy data helped because we didn't have to write out all of the specific names for different list items and the icons were chosen beforehand. So that's great. That's going to be it for the look of our sidebar. But what do you say that we implement our React Context API now? That's going to allow us to keep track of the state of the navigation bar to figure out should it be currently opened or closed. So let's do that right away. To create our context, we can close the currently open files and then go to source, contexts, and then create a new file called context provider.js. Inside of there, we can import React as well as create context, use context, and finally use state. And these are coming from React. Of course, I misspelled context right here, so let's get that fixed. And then we'll have to say const state context is equal to create context, and then we call that as a function. Below that, we can define our initial state. And that initial state is nothing more than a simple object. Our chat is at the start going to be set to false. And that chat means, is this currently opened or is it closed? Then we're going to have the cart, which is also by default going to be set to false. We also have our user profile, which is set to false. And finally, we have our notification, which is also set to false. So that's just the state of all of these different things that we can click and open up. At the start, they're all set to false. Now we can say export const context provider. That context provider is a basic React arrow function component, which in props has the children property. Inside of there, we can declare all different kinds of state, and of course, we can return something. Usually, what you return inside of a context provider is the state context dot provider, like this. But to return that, usually what you return inside of a context provider is a state context dot provider. The most important thing that that provider has to have is the value property. So we can expand it a bit and create a value property right here, which is an object. Whatever values you pass through here, they will be passed through all of the components inside of our entire application. So, of course, we'll have to pass the state. Is our sidebar currently opened or is it closed? And the second most important thing with our context is that you always return children inside of it. That means that whatever you wrap your context with, whatever is inside of it will be displayed. So if you wrap this entire page with the context, you still want to return that actual page, right? That's where the children comes in. It returns the underlying component below that context. But now let's actually add all of the states or all of the logic of our application that our context is going to have. The first one, which we already talked about, is the state. So let's say used state snippet. It's going to be called active menu and set active menu. And at the start, it's going to be set to true. There we go. Now, what we can do is we can simply pass that state over through to the value. So right here, value is an object, and we're going to say active menu is active menu. Or as you already know, if you have both the key and the value of the same value, then you can simply omit the latter. There we go. So now the question is, how can we use this active menu inside of our sidebar or app components? Well, we can export const something called as use state context. And it is simply a function that returns the call to the used context, but we pass in which context do we want to use. So we're saying, hey, give me the data from the context by using the context, and we specify which one, the state context. In our application, we're going to have one context, but in bigger applications, you can have multiple context providers. Whatever the case, once you create your provider, you render out the children and pass the values, you have to wrap your app with it. So we can go inside of our index.js. Inside of here, we can import context provider, and that's coming from /contexts/context provider. The only thing you have to do is wrap your app with the context provider. So we can say right here, context provider, and we can put our app right inside of it, like so. Of course, let's add a comma right here, and let's space everything correctly. There we go. So now, inside of our app, we can use all of these values. And the question is, of course, how? And the answer is quite simple. We import that use state context hook we created from /contexts/context provider. And we call it as a hook at the top, const, and we pull the values we want to pull. In this case, we want to get the active menu. That is equal to use state context, and we call it as a hook. We no longer have to use this static value. There we go. So now if we go back to our application, let's see where we're using this active menu. It's right here. So let's go inside of our sidebar and actually make these functions do something, like open and close the menu. We have to repeat the same thing we've just done, and that is to import the use state context from /context/context provider. There we go. And we use it as a hook right here. Const active menu, and that's coming from use state context. Of course, in here, we don't just need the active menu. We need the setter function for the menu so that we can open and close it. So if we go back to our context provider, what we can do is alongside the active menu, we can also pass the set active menu. That way, back inside of our sidebar, we can get that as well. Set active menu. Now, inside this on click, we can actually close the sidebar. So what we can say is callback function set active menu to false. And while we're here, we can also change this one. Inside of here, we're going to actually do something different. We're going to call the set active menu, but in this case, we want to change the menu by using the previous value of that menu. And you can do that by adding a callback function inside of there, and then you can get the prev active menu, which means previous state, and then you can use that previous state to toggle it on or off. There we go. So this is the cancel icon. So what do we have now is something like this. When you click it, it is gone. But currently, there is no way for us to bring it back because our navbar contains the button that should be there to bring it back. So that's definitely something that we should do. And that's going to be our next step, to implement the navigation bar. Let's go back to our app. Let's find where we're using the navbar, and let's hold Control and navigate to it. Finally, let's start with implementing the navigation bar. Our navbar will be a bit harder to develop and it will take some time. But trust me when I say this, once we're done with the navbar and the sidebar, we can just breeze through everything else. It's going to be amazing and you'll just start seeing all the functionality appear immediately. Usually, the navbar and the sidebar don't seem that tricky. They are almost not existent right here. But there is some functionality trying to figure out, is it currently opened or is it not? And once we have that figured out, then we'll be able to code everything really quickly. So let's start with the navbar. Right here, we can import the use effect hook, and we'll also need many different icons. So let's import the AI outline menu, and that will be coming from react-icons/AI. We're gonna also need to import the FI shopping cart, and that's gonna be coming from react-icons/FI. Then we're gonna need to import the BS chat left, and that is coming from react-icons/BS. We'll also need to import the RI notification 3 line from react-icons/RI. Of course, we need to fix the spelling right here and fix this import right here. That's just react-icons/FI. Just a few more left to go. We need to import the MD keyboard arrow, and that's coming from react-icons/MD. Great. We have all of the icons that we need, but we also need that tooltip. So we can import tooltip component from @Syncfusion /EJ2 React popups like this. We'll also be using some dummy data, so we can import the avatar image coming from data/avatar.jpg like this. And finally, we also need to import a few components, the cart, as well as chat, the notification, and finally, the user profile. And these are coming from just dot. We are already there. We are inside of the components. Finally, we're gonna import the use state context from /contexts/context provider. Now we have everything we need. So to start coding out our navbar, we can immediately get that active menu state. So we can say const active menu like this, as well as the set active menu is coming from, or rather is equal to, use state context, and then we call it as a hook. Now below that, we can actually start implementing our navbar. So let's start with class names for the div. Class name is going to be equal to flex, justify dash between, padding -2 or just p-2. On medium devices, the margin X is going to be set to 6. Margin X simply means margin left and right, everything on X axis. And finally, the position is going to be set to relative. Now you can see that everything jumped on top, but that's going to be fixed really soon once we actually implement the navigation bar. Inside of our navigation bar, we're going to have many different navigation bar buttons. So let's create a new component to make her life easier. Const nav button. Our nav button is going to be a normal React arrow function component with instant return. It's going to accept a few properties. That's going to be a title, a custom function, which we want to call, an icon, a color, and the dot color. Soon enough, you'll see what all of these properties do. So what is our nav button? Well, essentially, it is a button wrapped in a tooltip component. Our tooltip component is going to have the content equal to title, and the position is going to be set to bottom center. Inside of there, we can finally render our button. Now, it might be a good idea to already call one of these buttons below just so you can see what's happening on the screen. So let's call our first nav button right here as a self-closing component. We can pass a few props to it. Title is going to be set to menu, and that custom func we can pass to it is going to be a callback function where we simply call the set active menu like this. Again, we have a callback function inside of it where we get the previous active menu state, so previous active menu, and then we simply toggle it. So if it was open, then we're going to close it, and vice versa. Great, so now we have the title and the custom function. We're going to also have a color, and this color is that same color of the theme we're changing. Remember this blue at the bottom right? Well, let's also set this to blue, but later on, we're going to make this dynamic. Finally, we have to pass the icon, and the icon in this case is going to be a component, AI outline menu. There we go. So now we have everything we need to create our first nav button. Let's go ahead and actually use that data inside of our nav button component. Our button is going to have a type is equal to button, like this. And what is that button going to do? Well, on click, it is going to call that custom function, like this. The reason why we couldn't have taken this code right here and put it straight right here is because other nav buttons won't do the same action as this one does. So they're always going to call the action that we provide to it. That's going to allow us to extend the functionalities. Then we're going to also give it a style, and style is going to be equal to the color. And we can also give it some class names. So we can say class name is equal to relative, text-xl, rounded-full, p-3 for padding, on hover, bg-light-gray. And what is the button going to render? That's going to be a span element with a style equal to background, which is .color, like this. And it's also going to have a class name. The class name is going to be equal to absolute, inline-flex, rounded-full, h-2, w-2, right-2, and top-2. Finally, inside of it, we can display our icon. There we go. So now if we save this, you should be able to see this small icon right here. If it's zoomed out, you can barely see it. But once you click it, take a look at that. We are actually opening and closing our sidebar. This is looking great. Of course, we just have to make that icon a bit bigger. And when I say a bit, I mean quite a lot. Before we do that though, let me show you how easy it will be to add all of these other icons as well. What we can do is scroll down, create a div right here. That div is going to contain all of the other nav icons. The only thing it's going to have is a class name equal to flex. Now let's copy our original nav button. Let's just space out all of the props so we can more easily see what's happening. There we go. Color blue, and icon is right here as well. There we go. So this is one of our nav buttons. Now this one is for the menu, or at least it was, but now we can actually change it to something else. Let's do cart, and a custom function is going to be a call to a new function, which we haven't yet created, handle click, and we're going to pass cart as a parameter. Then we're going to set the color to be blue again. And finally, we're going to give it a different icon, FI shopping cart. There we go. So now you can see it on the top right of the screen if you zoom quite a lot. While we're here, let's also add all of the other icons by duplicating this one. The title is going to be chat. This one can also have that dot color. So let's say dot color is, that's going to be a hexadecimal 03C9D7. There we go. You can see we have a dot for notifications. And what we can do is change the icons to BS chat left. So as you can see, now we have this chat right here. And of course, the function is going to be handle click, and it's going to open the chat. This doesn't do anything right now, but it will soon. And the last one is going to be for our notifications and our profile. So as you can see right here, we have cart, chat, notification, and profile. What we can do is say notifications right here. That's going to point to handle click, and it's going to open up the notification, singular. And the icon is going to be RI notification 3 line. There we go. Finally, we need the last one for the profile. And profile is going to be just a bit different. As you can see, it is not really just a single icon. So what we can do is create a tooltip component. That tooltip is going to have a content equal to profile, like this. And position is going to be set to bottom center. Inside of the tooltip, we're going to have a div. So right here, let's create a div. And that div is going to have a few class names. So let's add a class name equal to flex, items-center, gap-2, cursor-pointer, p-1 for padding, on hover, bg-light-gray, and rounded-lg. Once we click on that div, we want to open the profile. So we can say on click, callback function, where we handle click. And we're going to pass in the user profile as a string. Now you can see nothing happened yet, but inside of that div, we're going to add an image. This image is going to have a source equal to avatar. And there we go. Our avatar appeared. We can give it a class name equal to rounded-full to make it into a circle, as well as W-8 and H-8 to make it just a bit smaller. There we go. Finally, below that image, we can create a p tag, and that p tag is going to have two different span elements. The first one is going to say hi and a comma. After that span, we can create just a space like this. And we're going to have one more span below it, span right here, that's going to say Michael. Of course, we can apply some properties. The first one is going to have a class name is equal to text-gray-400 and text-14. The bottom one is going to have a class name equal to text-gray-400, font-bold, ML for margin left is equal to 1, and text-14. So there we go. Now you should be able to see hi, Michael. Finally, we need that arrow down. So below the p tag, we can render the MD arrow down, and we can also give it the same class name as we gave to hi. So class name, text-gray-400, and then also text-14. As you can see, this means that we can hover over it and click on it to make it open. And that's it when it comes to the looks of our actual navigation bar. It is a bit too small, but we're going to fix that really soon. Something that we also need to figure out is how can we get our context know when we clicked on one of these specific icons? We have to move that value to the context so that the context knows how to open the cart, chat, notifications, or the profile. To do that, we can go back inside of our context provider and we can create a new use state field. So we can say use state snippet. Let's call it is clicked. Set is clicked, and the initial state is going to be the value of our initial state object. Nothing has been clicked at the start. Now we can pass those two values, is clicked and set is clicked, alongside our values right here. That means that we're going to get access to them inside of our navbar. So now if we go back to our navbar At the top, we can get those values right here, is clicked, and also set is clicked. There we go. Once we have that, at the bottom, we can render different elements just below the tooltip component. So we can say if is clicked dot cart and then we want to render the cart component. We can duplicate this 4 times. If we clicked on the chat, then we want to render the chat component. If we clicked on the notification, then we want to show the notification component. And finally, if we clicked on the user profile, we want to show the user profile component. There we go. So at the start, nothing should be there because everything is turned off. But now let's actually implement the logic to turn it on. To do that, we can go back to our context provider and we can create one important property, that handle click function we talked about. So our handle click is going to look something like this. Const handle click. In here, as a first and only parameter, we're going to get the information on which element has been clicked. So we can say clicked. And then what we can do is simply call set is clicked to be equal to clicked, like this. But if you think about it, that won't really work because set is clicked, or rather is clicked property, is an object. So we cannot just override the object with a string. What we need to do is open up the object, spread the initial state, meaning where everything is false, and then inside of square brackets, only change the value that has been clicked and set it to true. This is how the handle click works. And now we can pass it as a value through our state context. Back in our navbar, we can now retrieve that value from the context. Handle click. There we go. So now if we click right here, you can see cart appeared at the top, cart. And if we click on chat, chat appeared. Same thing for notification, profile, and everything else. That means that our logic is working. But of course, we're going to have to style the notification, chat, cart, and profile components to nicely show like this, and not just like a text appearing at the right of the profile page. Great. So now most of the logic is done, but there are just a few small details that we have to handle. And one of these is, remember, we initially always open the sidebar by default, but if we are on mobile, we don't want to have it opened because it would take almost the entire screen. Take a look at this, and now you cannot even close it. So we'll have to figure out what is the width of the screen, and then if the width is really small, then we won't open the sidebar at all. So that is going to be our next step. We can go back to our context provider and then create another state. Use state snippet. That's going to be screen size and set screen size. At the start, it's going to be undefined because we don't know what the screen size is. We first have to find that out. Once you have the screen size and set screen size, we can pass it over to our state context provider. Now going back to our navbar, we can actually make use of these values. So right here, let's get the screen size and set screen size, and we can call our first use effect. So simply type use effect. It accepts a callback function, and then the second parameter is a dependency array, meaning when is this going to be called? For example, if you put nothing here, it's going to be called only at the start. And if you put screen size here, it's going to be called every time that screen size changes. That would be really heavy for our application, and we don't want to do that. We simply want to figure out the size initially when the window loads. So to do that, we can create a new function inside of the use effect called handle resize. That's going to be an arrow function where we simply set the screen size to be equal to window.innerWidth. Then we're going to add the window.addEventListener to our window, and we're gonna track all of the resize options. If it resizes, then we're gonna recall the handle resize function. So every time we resize it, we're going to set the screen size to that specific size. And we also want to call the handle resize initially, just on its own, to figure out the initial width. In React, whenever you use something like this, window.add event listener, you also want to remove that event listener. So what you can do is say return a callback function, window.remove event listener, and then you provide the string resize and handle resize function. Now we're tracking what is the width of our browser or of our device. But the question is, what do we do with that information? Well, it's going to play an important role inside of our sidebar, but it also serves a small purpose right here inside of the navbar. Let's create a second use effect, and you can have as many use effects as you want. The only difference is that now we're actually going to keep track of some changes. More specifically, we're going to track the change of the screen size, like this. So whenever screen size changes, if screen size is lower than or equal to 900, then set active menu, like this, to be set to false. And else, if it is larger or wider than 900, set active menu to true. Now, as you can see, since we were on a small device like this, and if we reload, it's going to immediately hide the sidebar so we can see better what's on the screen. We're just preparing everything for the great content that we're going to have really soon. Great. So now we're successfully tracking the size of our screen. And as I've said, that's going to be really useful inside of our sidebar component as well. So let's go there. If we open up our sidebar component, we can now use that screen size value right here. So that's going to be screen size. And we're going to create a special function, const handle close sidebar. It's an arrow function, and it's going to check if active menu is true and screen size is lower than or equal to 900. In that case, it's going to close the menu as well. There we go. And we can call that function right here on click of our link. So on click, you can simply call handle close sidebar. There is one other place where we call it though. That's going to be whenever we click a specific link. So we have a nav link right here, and on click, see, we have to do something. Well, we have to close that sidebar because you know what happens on mobile devices. Let's go to the mobile device width, open it up, and usually it covers almost the entire screen, so you cannot see what's happening. And now if you click orders, imagine if the sidebar was remaining right here. If it wasn't removed, then you would have to manually close it every time once you select something. But what we're doing right here is we're checking if you're on a mobile device, and if you are, when you click, it's going to automatically close. But if you're not on a mobile device, and if you click, it's going to remain opened. So as you can see, there is more than meets the eye. We are really creating the best dashboard application ever, and I'm teaching you all of these tips and tricks that you don't usually see in just basic tutorials. This is something that you do on real applications to make sure that the client is happy. Great. With that said, we are now doing really good with our sidebar and navigation bar. But as you know, if we zoom it out to full width, you can see that our icons are really small. So let's figure out the problem with that. The icons are inside of our navbar, more specifically inside of the nav button, because we know the style that's wrong is affecting all of them at the same time. So it should be something around here, right around the icon. And I immediately spotted it. This span right here was supposed to be just that dot, but it was not supposed to wrap the icon. So let's simply self-close the span element and then put the icon right below it. This is how it should have been. And there we go. The icons are now immediately larger because we have the text XL right here in the button. This is looking great. Now that that is done, we are ready to start creating our first page of the day, the e-commerce page. It's going to look something like this once it is done. This is a really diverse page with a lot of different cards to really show you what we can do. Of course, this doesn't have to be just e-commerce data. Instead of earnings, you could have the total number of users using your platform. In here, we can put any kinds of different metrics and any kind of different charts. But this should give you a really quick overview of how Syncfusion can help you code faster. But of course, once we're done with this page, then we're going to dive even deeper into what Syncfusion offers. I'm talking all of these different pages, tables, charts, and applications. Great. So with that said, let's start coding out our main e-commerce view. We can start by closing all of our currently open files and leaving only the app. Inside of the app, we can control-click into e-commerce, and this is of course where we'll start implementing that page. We can import React from React, as well as import BS currency dollar, and that's coming from react-icons/BS. We're going to also import the Go primitive dot, and that is coming from react-icons/Go. We also need to import some of our components like stacked, which is a chart, pie chart as well, a button, and finally a spark line chart as well, coming from /components. Finally, we need to import some dummy data. So we can say import earning data. Then we need to import spark line area data. And finally, ecom pie chart data. Now we have everything we need. That is coming from data/dummy. There we go. And finally, we need to import the context by saying import use state context from data/contexts/context provider. Now we have everything we need. So let's start with implementing this beautiful view right here. Again, this doesn't have to be just e-commerce. This is a classic dashboard view with some cards, information, and metrics. Great. So to start off, we can have a div. And that div is going to have a class name equal to mt-12 to divide it a bit from the navigation bar. Then we're going to have a div that's going to have a class name equal to flex-wrap, and on large devices, flex-no-wrap, and also justify-center. Inside of there, we can create one more div. And we're just starting to create the layout. So usually when you're just creating the layout, you will have many divs. The next div is going to have a class name equal to bg-white. On dark mode, text-gray-200. On dark mode, bg-secondary-dark-bg. Height-44. Rounded-XL. W-full. On large devices, W-80, P-8, PT-9, margin or M-3, BG-hero-pattern, and also BG-no-repeat, BG-cover, and BG-center. Now, if we save this, you can see that we have this image, but it is barely visible on the right side. So I think we have a problem with the layout. Looks like our actual content is not appearing below our navigation bar and sidebar. It's appearing to the side. So that issue is most likely going to be inside of the app.js. It looks like to me, we have our navbar right here, but we closed it too soon. So this div should actually be closed after all of the routes. So just copy it And then let's go below the div containing all the routes, and let's add one extra div right here. So now if you save this, there we go. Now we can see this great looking banner, and we can see that our content is actually appearing below the navigation bar as it should. So now going back to our e-commerce, we can continue implementing the layout. We're going to have one more div, and this div is going to have a class name equal to flex, justify dash between, and items dash center. Trust me, there is just one more div right here, and this one won't have any styles. Inside of there, rather, we're going to show two different p tags. The first one is going to say earnings. There we go. We can see earnings right here. And the other one is going to specify what the earnings are. So let's simply copy this number right here. And I'm going to create another p tag and paste it. Of course, feel free to use any number right here. I'm going to add a class name, which is going to be font-bold, as well as text-gray-400. There we go. And for the bottom one, let's say class name is equal to text-2xl to make it a bit bigger. This is looking good. Now below this div and this div as well, we can add one more div. This div is going to have a class name equal to mt-6. And we're going to have a button in there, but not a typical button, our own button component. So, of course, we have to first provide some props to it, like color is going to be white. BG color is going to be the dynamic color that we choose, but right now we're just going to set it to blue. Text is going to say something like download. And finally, border radius is going to be set to something like 10 pixels. Now we can control click to go inside of that component. Isn't it handy that we created all of the components beforehand? So to implement this button, we can of course accept all of the prompts we're passing into it, such as BG color, size, text, border radius, and that's gonna be it for now. This button is going to be just a regular, simple button. So we can give it a type right here, and the type is going to be equal to button. We can also give it a style, something like background color is equal to BG color, like this, and also color is equal to color. Of course, we can just omit that. And then finally, border radius. There we go. We can also apply some class name, something like class name is equal to, we're going to make it into a template string, text dash, and then we want to render the size we passed into this button. So right here, we didn't pass any size. So what we can do is say something like size is equal to MD, like medium. So text dash size, p-3, hover is going to be drop dash shadow dash XL. That's going to be all that we need for now. And inside of there, we can render our text. There we go, a blue download button. Of course, this is a really dark blue right now, but as soon as we implement theming, we'll be able to change it as we go by using the settings icon on the bottom right. Now we can go below this div right here and below one more div. There we can create one new div, and this div is going to represent our cards. So these cards right here, the class name is going to be set to flex, m-3, flex-wrap, justify-center, gap-1, and items-center. Then we have to open a dynamic block of code, and inside of there, we can go over the earning data, .map, we're going to get each individual item, and we can instantly return something. For each card, we're going to return a div, and that div is going to have a key equal to item.title, and it's also going to have a class name. That's going to be bg-white. On dark mode is going to be text-gray-200. On dark mode, the BG is going to be set to secondary light-dark-bg. On medium devices, the width is going to be 56. Padding is going to be 4. Padding top is going to be 9. And rounded-2XL. There we go. So you can see those 4 little cards right here. Now, inside of that div, we can create a button. This button is going to have a type is equal to button. It's also going to have a style property. So style is equal to, where the color is going to be equal to item.icon color. And also background color is going to be equal to item.icon bg. There we go. So inside of there, we can render the item.icon. There we go. Not looking bad, but still requires some styling. So let's also add a class name equal to text-2XL. Let's change the opacity to 0.9 to make it just a bit less visible. We can make it rounded-full and also padding-4. This is really going to make it pop. Let's also on hover, set the drop-shadow-XL. So now if we hover over it, we have that nice shadow. Looking great so far. Below that button, we can render out a p tag, and that p tag is going to have a class name equal to empty-3. There, we're going to have a span element, and that span is going to have a class name equal to text-lg font-semi-bold. And we can simply say something like item.amount. So now it's going to render a specific amount right here. We can create one more span below it. So span element, and this one is going to render the item.percentage. And again, this is all just demo data we're working on. So this span is also going to have a class name, but it's going to be dynamic. It's going to have a template string, text-sm, and then text-item.pc color. So this is the color of the actual span element, and then ml-2, like this. So this should actually change all the colors. Green if it is positive, and red if it is negative. But what's happening is, I think we found a bug in Tailwind. That would be huge. So looks like right here, it should be getting the PC color. So if we click over, you can see we have red 600 and green 600. Right now, it's just reading the reds. But if we just type it out manually, text-green-600, it starts working. But now all of them are like that. If we switch to text-red-600, this also works. But now if we make it dynamic, so item.pc color, now it actually works. So it made it work after we manually switched it. But initially, Tailwind didn't pick out that this was a dynamic value. This is a really interesting bug that we just stumbled upon. But that's good. It's important that we fixed it. Next, below this p tag, we're going to have one more p tag. And this p tag is going to simply render the item.title. There we go. But let's style it a bit. Let's give it a class name equal to text-sm, as well as text-gray-400 and empty-1. There we go. This is already looking so much better. We have 4 of these cards right here. Now, if we unzoom to regular size, like this, and if we expand it just a bit, you can see that it nicely scales to the center of the screen. Looking great. So now we can continue with implementing the rest of the layout. Let's go below this div right here. And also let's go below one more div, like this, because we're starting with a whole new section. So let's create a new div element. And just to give you an idea of what we're going to work on now, it's going to be this big card that has the revenue updates, and it has a graph with expense and budget right here. So this is going to be the first time that we're going to actually dive into more Syncfusion components. It took us a long time to create this layout, and so far we haven't really explored all of the benefits that Syncfusion does. Now, as soon as we start implementing different pages and functionalities using Syncfusion, you're gonna start noticing the difference and in how much less time it takes you to build something even better. So let's start with this section right now. To start implementing the revenue update section, we can go inside of this newly created div and we can give it a class name. Let's make it a flex and let's add a gap of 10. A flex wrap of wrap, so just flex-wrap with tailwind, and justify-center. We're gonna have one more div inside of there. So this div is going to have a class name equal to bg-white, and also on dark mode, text-gray-200, and on dark mode, bg-secondary-dark-bg, margin-3 or m-3, p-4, rounded-2xl, and on medium devices, w-780 pixels, like this. That's going to create this nice looking paper-like div. Of course, let's add something inside of it. We can start by adding a div, and this div is going to have a class name equal to flex and justify-between. Inside of there, we're gonna have a p tag, and this p tag is going to say revenue updates. There we go, as you can see. And we can also give it a class name, font-semi-bold, and text-xl. There we go, revenue updates. Below that p tag, we can have one more div, and this div is going to have a class name equal to flex, items-center, and gap-4. Inside of there, we're gonna have a p element, and this p element is going to have a span, inside of which we're gonna render the go primitive dot, a self-closing icon. There we go, as you can see it on the top right corner. And we're going to also create one more span, which is going to say expense. Okay, doesn't really make so much sense so far, but let's add some class names to our p tag. Let's do flex, items-center. Let's also do gap-2, text-gray-600, and on hover, drop-shadow-xl. There we go. So now we have this nice expense tag, but we can simply duplicate this p tag below, change the text to green 400 right here. And then instead of expense, we're gonna say budget. There we go. So now we have this part right here. We can see that we're talking about expense and budget. Great. So now we're gonna jump onto this part. On the left side, we're gonna have two different text elements, a line chart, and then on the right side, we're gonna have this great looking stacked chart. So now we can go below this p tag and below two more divs. And then right here, we're going to create one more div. This div is going to have a class name equal to empty-10, flex, gap-10, flex-wrap, and justify-center. Nothing should happen if we save this, but now we have to add something inside of it. And that something is going to be a div with a border. So let's add a class name, border-r-1, border-color, and also m-4 and pr-10, padding right. If we save that, you can see that nothing is gonna happen, but we can add a div inside of it, and that div is going to contain a p element. That p is going to have two span elements inside of it. The first one is going to render this amount right here. So we can copy and paste it right here. And below that, we can simply render this percentage right here. So let's copy it, create a new span element, and paste the percent. Of course, we have to style them somehow. So let's give a class name to the first span, which is going to be text-3xl and font-semi-bold. There we go. That's much bigger. And to the second one, we can give a class name equal to p-1.5. So let's give it some padding. And now you'll see how we can create this little pill-like structure using only Tailwind. Let's also give it on hover, drop-shadow-xl, cursor-pointer, rounded-full, text-white, and bg-green-400, margin left-3, and text-xs. And there we go. We have our little percentage sign. Looking great. Now we have to add the expense, of course. So below this p tag, we're going to add another p tag, and this one is simply going to say budget. We can give it a class name is equal to text-gray-500 and empty-1. There we go. Now we can copy this entire div, paste it below, and remove the span element with the percentage. We don't need the percentage for the budget. Let's say that the budget is going to be something like 48,000, and that's going to be the expense. So if we save that, you can see that we have the expense and the budget. But to this div, let's just add a class name equal to empty-8, like this. There we go. So now we are getting just a bit closer to our actual revenue updates card. It's time that we code out our first chart, a sparkline chart. You can see we can actually hover over it and get different data points. Although it is quite simple, it is looking great. So right below this div, we can create a new div. This div is going to have a class name equal to empty-5, and inside of there, we're going to call a self-closing spark line chart like this. This is the component that we've created. First, before we go to it, let's actually pass some props. We're going to pass in the current color, which is going to be dynamic later on. For now, let's simply say blue. Let's also give it an ID, line-spark line, like this. We need to give it a type, which is going to be set to a line. We need to give it a height, which is going to be set to 80 pixels. So that is 80. And we also need to pass in a width, which is in this case going to be something like 250 pixels. Of course, we need to pass the data for that chart, and we already have that prepared, sparkline area data. And we can pass in the color, which is again going to be just blue. There we go. So now we're passing all of the necessary props, and we can actually go into that sparkline component and make use of it. To start implementing the sparkline component, we can import the sparkline component from add Syncfusion /EJ2/React-charts. We installed this package before, and it gives us access to all of the charts. We're going to also import inject. Soon enough, you'll see what that is for. And we're going to import the sparkline tooltip. There we go. That's all that we need. And this is actually the first time in this whole video that you're going to see how to use Syncfusion's component. Well, I'm lying. You did see that tooltip component right here. But that was just the smallest possible part of what Syncfusion offers. Now you're going to see a small chart in action. But the main thing is to notice how simple it is to create it. So let's dive right in. First, we have to get all of the props that we're passing into Sparkline component. That's the ID, height, width, color, data, type, and current color. There we go. And now the only thing that we're going to return is going to be a Sparkline component. There we go, like this. Of course, we have to provide some props to it. So now if you reload the page, you won't be able to see anything. But how do you know? Which props do we have to provide? Well, one of the things that I really like about Syncfusion is their documentation. There are plenty of examples to show you how any component works. you don't need to go to any other website for help. Their documentation shows you everything. It will answer all of your questions. There are code demos, different demos for different situations, and everything else you might need. So in this case, you can go to Sparkline, Getting Started, and then you can explore how to install it. We already have the React charts, and you simply need to call it. That's it. But now, of course, how can we change the dimensions, types, axis customization? Everything is here. So don't worry, I'm going to teach you how to use this component in this video. But if you have any additional questions, simply visit their documentation. It's amazing. Our Sparkline component needs to have an ID. So let's say ID is equal to the ID that we're passing through props. We're going to do the same thing with the height and the width. We're already passing these through props, so that's easy. We're going to set the line width to be equal to 1 and the value type to be equal to numeric. We're going to set the fill to be equal to color. And finally, we're going to set the border to be equal to color, which is equal to current color, and the width, which is going to be set to 2. Nothing is going to show yet because we didn't put anything inside of it. What we have to do is we have to call the inject component like this, and we have to provide the services that we're planning on using. Services, inside of an array, we want to use the Sparkline tooltip. That's going to allow us to kind of hover over it to see more data about the chart. Now that we have this, we can continue with all the different properties. So let's finally provide the data source, the most important part. And that is going to be equal to the data that we're passing in. Finally, we're going to say the x-axis name is equal to x. Also, the y name is equal to something like y. And the type is equal to the type we're passing through props. Now, you're going to notice that everything is still blank. So if we go to inspect and open up the console, you can see some great useful errors. Sparkline component is not defined. So if we go back, looks like we called it Sparkline right here. And let's see how did we call it in the import. That is Sparkline. So that seems all right, right? Yeah, Sparkline. But Sparkline component is not defined. So that's happening right here. Looks like I misspelled it. Sparkline component. In here, I have a lowercase l, and that's how it should be. So let's simply fix it here. And there we go. As soon as I reloaded the page, the chart is right here. The chart is good as it is, but we can also provide some more tooltip data. So let's simply say tooltip settings is going to be equal to an object. We're going to say visible is set to true. And then we're going to set the format to be equal to, in a string, $x like this, and then data, and then y right here. So this is what's going to happen once we actually hover over it. This is the x value, and then this is the y value. And we can also add track line settings like this. And inside of an object, say visible is true. Now, if we do this, if you hover, you can see that we are now seeing the data of the chart. Of course, this data isn't that relevant right now because it's not connected to this data. This is just dummy data. But imagine if you had real data to show. You would be able to show this and add this great tooltip explaining the data at each point. And that is it. I know this was a simple chart, but you can see it is just one single component and then some options to get this great looking chart, which is fully mobile responsive. Now we can get back to e-commerce and we can continue with the revenue updates. It looks like our button is next. So just below this div, we're going to add one more div, and this div is going to have a class name is equal to mt-10, and also it's going to have a button, which is a self-closing component. It's going to have the color equal to white, as well as a BG color is equal to blue. Text is going to say something like download report, and border radius is going to be 10 pixels. Now, if we go back, you can see this button right here. But now let's create this better looking chart using Syncfusion as well. This time we can actually toggle on and off expense or budget to see what's happening. So below this div and below one more div, we're going to create a final div. And this div is going to render a stacked self-closing component. To that component, we're going to pass the width, which is going to be equal to 320 pixels, and the height, which is going to be equal to 360 pixels. Great. So of course, we cannot see anything yet because we have to go inside of our component and implement it right here. This is going to be the second opportunity for you to see how amazing Syncfusion is and how you can create great charts in a matter of minutes. First, we'll have to import a few things from Syncfusion. So we can say import chart component, as well as series collection directive. We can also get the series directive. And don't worry about these names. I'm going to show you where to find them really soon. We're going to get the inject, as well as the legend, a category, a stacking column series, and finally the tooltip. And this is coming from add Syncfusion /ej2-react-charts. There we go. Finally, we have to import the data that we're going to use. So import stacked custom series, as well as stacked primary x-axis, and also stacked primary y-axis. There we go. This is coming from //data and then dummy. And that's going to be it for now. So how can we create this chart? Well, there's going to be just one return, and that is going to be the chart component. Inside of that chart component, we need to create an inject component with different services. So services indicate what do you want your chart to have. We want to have a legend, which is going to be this part right here to toggle it on and off. We also want to have a category, a stacking column series, and a tooltip. So the next step is to provide all of the necessary properties. Of course, we can first get some from the props. In there, we pass the width and the height. So what we can do is add the width, which is going to be equal to width, and also height, which is going to be equal to height. And as soon as you do that, you can see this nice looking grid where our chart will go. You can see how it also pushed the content to the left side. Let's also give it an ID equal to stack chart. We can also give it a primary x-axis to be equal to stacked primary x-axis. That's going to change it a bit for the purposes of this specific task. And we can also specify the primary y-axis as stacked primary y-axis. This is coming from dummy data, and that just allows us to better show the data, just 100, 200, 300, 400, and so on. We could have easily not provided this, so let's comment it out for now, and we'll see how it goes. The next thing we have to do is provide the chart area property, and that's going to be equal to an object where we're going to set the border to be equal to another object with the width set to 0. So we've completely removed the border with one easy line. We're going to set the tooltip to be equal to an object where we set the enable property to true. And finally, the most important part is below this inject, we can call the series collection directive. And inside of there, we can map over our stacked custom series. That stacked custom series is the data coming from our dummy data. So we can say .map. We're going to get the item and the index. And we want to return a series directive for each one of our items. Like this. that is a self-closing tag to which we're going to give a key equal to index. And also we're going to spread all of the properties of our item. These are our actual data points. So I'm going to go into our data so you can see how does it look like. There we go. Stacked chart data. We simply provide all of the different values of this chart. For example, on x-axis, we have some specific dates, and then on y, we have values for those dates. And it looks like the chart is smart enough that it immediately noticed what do we want to use for x-axis and y-axis. So now it looks like it's not even necessary. What we can do is also say legend settings. That's going to be an object where we are going to set the background to be white. There we go. So now we can actually see what's happening and we can toggle on and off specific values. This is great. We just created a great looking chart in a matter of minutes. The chart quickly disappeared for me, so I think it's letting me know that I need the primary Y and primary X axis. So I'm simply going to bring them back and everything is looking great right now. And the only thing that doesn't seem to be working right now are the tooltips. If we hover over it, we cannot get any extra information. And to fix that, I think we have to change the ID. Based on how we specified our demo data, we have to call this in the same way. So that's going to be charts. And if we reload the page, you can see that the tooltip now works and we can see our total expense by month as well as the budget by month. This is great. We can toggle it on and off and we have a great looking card. That is it for our initial e-commerce page. Now we're finally ready to start creating all of our other pages packed with amazing functionality, like these orders pages, employees, customers, calendar, Kanban board, and so much more. So that's going to be the next step. We can go back to our app, we can close all of the currently open files, and as you can see right here, the next page we can work on is the orders page. So let's control-click orders and go straight there. Inside of our browser, we can also open the orders and you can see that it is currently empty. So if you feel like you need to take a break, this is a great time to just sit up a bit, do some exercise, and then come back. Exciting stuff awaits. We're going to implement this entire table, which allows you to sort out the items by name, customer name, the amount, status, and the order ID. So stay tuned. Inside of the orders, we can first import some of the things we're going to need from Syncfusion. So that's going to be import grid component, like this. We're going to also need the columns directive. We're going to also need the singular column directive, also the resize component, the sort component, context menu, filter component, page, Excel export. Yep, even that is available. PDF export, edit, and finally inject. And all of that is coming from add Syncfusion /EJ2-React-grids. For the data, we can import the orders data and the context menu items, as well as the orders grid. That is coming from /data/dummy. There we go. And finally, we'll be using our header, so we can import the header component like this from /components. And actually, the header component is going to be the one that we're going to create first. So inside of this div, we can render out the header component and we can pass in the title equal to orders and a category equal to page. There we go. So this is not a Syncfusion component. This is a component that we can create on our own. So we can simply control-click into it. We know that we want to accept a category as well as the title. And this header is simply going to be a div that's going to have a class name equal to margin bottom or MB-10. It's going to have a p tag. That p tag is going to have a class name equal to text-gray-400. And inside of there, we're going to render out the category. Finally, we're going to have one more p tag, and this one is going to render the title. So now if we save this, you can see page and orders. And let's also give a class name to this title. That's going to be text-3XL, font-extra bold, tracking-tight, and text-slate-900. As soon as you do that, you can see this page orders right here. That's going to be it for the header. So we can go back into our orders, and right here, we can apply some class names to this div, wrapping our header. That's going to be margin-2, and on medium devices, margin 10, padding-2, and on medium devices, padding 10, BG-white, and rounded-3XL. As soon as we do that, you can see this nice header right here. Of course, now we have to create the actual table. And as you can see, this table is packed with functionality. We're looping over a lot of different items, and we can sort them out by item, customer name, and even the amount. So how would we go about implementing this using Syncfusion? Well, what we can do is create a grid component right here. And the component for that is called columns directive. That's simply where the data goes. So we can go over our orders grid, .map, we're going to get an item as well as the index. And for each item, we want to simply render an individual column directive. That's how they call it, column directive. And to that self-closing tag, we need to provide a key, which is equal to index, and then we spread all the data, ... item. There we go. If you do that, you'll notice that the website crashes, so we can go to inspect and console, and as you can see, column directive is not defined. That is my bad, I misspelled it right here. So this is supposed to be column. There we go. So as soon as you fix this, you'll immediately be able to see our great looking grid. We have image, item, customer name, total amount, and all of that is coming from our orders grid. We can actually go into it, and as you can see, you can specify exactly how much space is each specific header going to take. So far, we've just set up all the headers. But now, how do we actually pass the data to that grid component? Well, first of all, we can give it an ID. ID equal to grid comp. And then below that, you can provide the data source, the most important thing. Data source is equal to orders data. As soon as you do that, all of our data is going to get populated right inside of our grid. Isn't that amazing? You can also scroll horizontally and you can see all of the data right there. Another great thing to notice is that the table is fully mobile responsive. If you expand it, it's going to take the full width of the screen. This is looking amazing. All of our items are right here, and as you can see, by default, we don't have any pagination. By default, we also cannot do anything, like sort the items by item, customer name, or so on. So how do you actually allow for these things? The only thing you have to do to enable pagination is say allow paging. Save that and scroll down. You can see that now you only have the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 elements, but we have no other elements. But we also don't have the page, right? So how can we actually move to the second page? Well, we're gonna use that inject component. And by now, you should start seeing the pattern. We first use the basics of every component, and then using inject and some additional properties, you can allow for some additional features, like pagination. So we're gonna say inject services inside of an array. we want to add resize. We also want to add sort, context menu, filter, page, Excel, export, edit, and PDF export. There we go. So now if you save that, you can see that the pagination appeared right here. Now you might be wondering, how do you allow sorting? How can we sort these items? Think about it. Well, it's actually funny how simple it is. The only thing you have to do is say allow sorting. And that is it. Save it, add it right here to injected services, and sorting works right out of the box. Isn't this amazing? And that is everything we had to do to get this amazing sortable orders page. Isn't that crazy? Now, it took us just a few minutes to implement it, and it is fully mobile responsive, and it's looking great. We have complete pagination for fetching data from an API. We have different pills right here for statuses, the total amount, customer name, as well as the item and the image. It's looking great. Now, soon enough, we're going to implement the employees tab, and there we're going to have an even more complex page where we'll be able to edit specific values and also search by name. So that is quite cool, and it's going to be as easy as implementing the orders page was. Amazing. So let's close out our orders, and let's go to our app and to our employees tab. Great. We are ready to start implementing our employees page. Since the employees and the orders page are quite similar, we can go ahead and start by copying the orders page entirely. So let's simply copy it, and let's paste everything right here. We're going to rename this back to employees right here, and also rename it right here. So what's going to be the difference in terms of imports? Well, the grid component is going to remain the same. We will need the inject, so that's fine. The columns directive and the column directive is the same. We won't be needing the resize, nor the sort, nor the context menu, filter as well. We will need the page though, and we won't need the exports. So what we will need to do is add the search in this case. Great, because we'll allow the user to search through different names. We won't need the orders data, rather that's going to be employees data. And finally, we'll also need the employees grid. There we go. The header, of course, is coming from components. So this part is going to be exactly the same. We're going to have the grid component, but now inside of the columns directive, we're going to loop over the employees grid right here. And in inject services, we're simply going to need the page and search. Great. So now if we save this and go back, we can reload the page. And it looks like I misspelled employees data right here, or rather that's going to be employees grid. So I've made a mistake there. There we go. And we're no longer using the orders data, so we can put employees data right here. With that fixed, that's it. Look at that. The table is right here. You might be wondering though, where is the search? Well, to add it, the only thing you have to do is say toolbar and then pass in an array that's going to say search. We're also going to remove this ID right here. And let's also set the width to be equal to auto. And finally, for our toolbar to appear, we'll have to import the toolbar from Syncfusion. And finally, add it to inject right here because we want to inject the toolbar functionality. So now you can reload the page and our search bar is right here. So if you search for something like Nancy, you can see it nicely filters it out. And let's delete and press enter and we are back to everyone. Let's go with Omar. That works as well and looks like everything is functioning perfectly. Now let's rename this to employees, of course. And that's going to be it for the employees page. The next page on our list is going to be the customers page. And you might have noticed a small bug we have right now. The page we're on is invisible in our sidebar. That's because we still haven't set up those theme colors. But don't worry, soon enough, we're going to fix that. So, as I've said, the next page on our list are our customers. Great. Great job on coming this far in this course. More amazing stuff coming right up when we switch to the calendar, Kanban, and the editor. These are incredibly exciting. Once finished, our customers table is going to look like this. We're going to have our usual table with pagination, but now we're going to have people right here, and you'll be able to select specific rows. Now, this is just a demo table, so actually clicking delete won't do anything. But if you implement full CRUD functionalities, you'll be able to remove rows from tables. Isn't that great? And the same thing goes for double-clicking right here and then changing the name. So we can now press enter, and as you can see, I've just changed a value in a specific table row. You can also change the status and everything else there is. That is great. So with that said, let's proceed with this edit table functionality. Inside of our customers, we can import, and that's going to be a grid component like this. We always have a grid. So far, been working with a lot of different Syncfusion grids. We're going to have a columns directive, as well as a singular column directive. Then we're going to have a page, a selection, inject for additional services, edit, toolbar, and sort, and finally filter. And these are coming from add Syncfusion /EJ2-React-Grids. There we go. Make sure that it is grids plural. And finally, we also need to import some local things, and these are going to be customers data, as well as customers grid. And that is coming from /data/dummy. There we go. And we're going to also use that same old header. So we can say import header, which is coming from /components. And we are ready to start implementing our great grid table. So first of all, let's wrap everything in a div. And that's going to be a div quite similar to the one we've already used in our previous employees component. So let's quickly switch to employees. And what we can do is essentially copy the entire thing because we're again working with a grid component, so most of the things are going to be quite similar. So let's simply paste it here. We're going to keep this div right here, but we're going to change some things inside of our header. This time, it's going to be customers and not employees. Now, for the data source, we no longer have employees data, so we can switch this to customers data. And down below, we're going to loop over the customers grid and not employees grid. Finally, we no longer have access to the search, so we can remove that search from here. And if you do that, and if you spell customers correctly, you should have a page that looks like this. So just by copying the previous table, we immediately managed to make this look quite great. But we're going to change it up a bit. So what we're going to do is we have the customers data. We will allow paging and allow sorting, but we're going to also add a few new parameters. In the toolbar, instead of search, we're going to include delete. There we go. And as you can see, there are many different options that you can add. Then we're going to also allow edit settings. And that's going to look something like this. An object where we're going to say allow deleting to be set to true, as well as allow editing, which is going to be set to true. So this should allow us to edit things. But of course, before we have to inject some additional services. So we have page, toolbar. We're going to also add selection, as well as edit, sort, and filter. That's going to be all that we need. So now if you save that, you should be able to double click. So now if you save and reload the page, you should be able to double click and you can edit specific fields. Of course, if you reload the page, that field is going to go back to what it was because we're not actually implementing any CRUD functionalities. That could be a video on its own. But if you'd like me to create that video and to connect full functionality in a MERN-like application with Syncfusion components, that would be amazing. So just let me know down in the comments. But with that said, this was incredibly easy. As you can see, our table is right here. We have pagination, we have delete right here, and we can edit each specific field in a row. Isn't that great? So with that, you just saw that it took us a lot of time to create this simple view using just Tailwind, right? But with Syncfusion, it was incredibly easy to create 3 quite different tables with different functionalities. But right now, we're diving into the good stuff. Now, we're gonna create 4 incredibly different components. I'm talking calendar, Kanban, editor, and color picker. All of them are entirely different, and you'll see how we can implement them using Syncfusion. So what I can do is collapse this back right here, and we're going to go into our calendar component right here, and also inside of our app, we can open up our calendar. There we go. Is that the first one? Yeah, the calendar is the first one here. To start with our calendar, we can import all of the necessary Syncfusion components. This time, it's not going to be a grid. We're going to import the schedule component. We also need a few more, and that's going to be views directive, as well as view directive, singular. You can already notice a similar pattern to what we've had in grids. We're gonna also import some additional services like day, week, work week, month, agenda, inject, resize, and finally, drag and drop. All of these are coming from at Syncfusion /EJ2-React-Schedule. And finally, to really modify everything even further, we're going to import the date picker component. And that is coming from add Syncfusion /EJ2-React-Calendars. We also need to import the schedule data. So right here, that's going to be schedule data. And it is coming from our usual data. So that's going to be /data/dummy. There we go. And it looks like we have an issue. Drag and drop right here coming from, that looks good to me, but it's saying that views directive has already been declared. In here, we were supposed to have a view directive, singular. Great. And finally, we're gonna also need a header, import header, and that is coming from /components. Great. Let me just spell this correctly. And we're good to start implementing the calendar. We're gonna have one div that's gonna wrap everything, and that div is going to have a class name equal to m-2 as margin, on medium devices m-10, mt-24, p-2, on medium devices p-10, bg-white, and rounded-3xl. This is going to be our entire card. Then inside of it, we're going to have our header, a self-closing tag, which is going to have a category equal to app, and is going to have a title equal to calendar. There we go. Great. You can see this header right here, the same one we've had with the orders, employees, customers, and now calendar. Now below our header, we can render out our schedule component. The schedule component is not going to be a self-closing tag because we need to inject some extra services inside of it. So we can say inject. That's going to be a self-closing tag that's going to have the services property. And that's going to be equal to an array where we're going to pass in the day, the week. We're going to also need work week, month, agenda, resize, and drag and drop. There we go. So now we have all of the services that we need. And if you do just that, you're gonna immediately see a great looking calendar appear right here. And as you can notice, we implemented day, week, work week, month, and agenda. So now if you click right here, the view is going to change immediately. Isn't that crazy? You can also switch between different weeks, or if you're in the month view, you can switch between different months. Also, right out of the box, if you click right here, you're gonna get a new title definition, so you can add a new event. And that's going to work right off the bat immediately. Drag and drop also works, so that is phenomenal. Now, of course, if I reload this page, the data will not stay here, and that's because we don't have any database connected to this. Again, if you want me to create a modern application where we're going to make all of this work, we can definitely do that. In this video, I'm just showing you how easy it is to create an amazing UI and to make it work with Syncfusion. Right now, if you start scrolling, you're gonna notice that it is quite long. So what we can do is we can change the height. Let's add some props and simply pass the height prop of something like 650. That way, it's going to fit nicely on our screen. And of course, the most important part for us right now is to import our schedule data. We can do that by creating a new property called event settings. We can set that to be an object and then say data source, like this, is equal to schedule data. If we save that, you should notice that nothing happened. And that's because if we go into our schedule data, you can notice that all of the start times and end times are around 2021. And now is 2022, so we cannot really see that. What we can do is change the starting date in this case. So we can say selected date is equal to new date. We pass in the date object. And let's do something like 2021, 0, and then 10. This is going to position us to that date. And if we scroll up, you can see all of our events right here. We can also switch to work week, month, so we can see everything even better. Agenda view is quite cool because you can see all of them listed in a nice list format, separated by days and sorted by times. This is looking great. And this amazing calendar right out of the box allows you to drag and drop different events. Click on them to edit them, and you have the ability to edit the title, location, the start and end date with the entire date and time pickers. Imagine how much time you would have to spend to create this in Material UI, or imagine how much time it would take if you were to do this from scratch. It would take weeks, and there would most likely be so many bugs because handling dates and times is incredibly difficult. With Syncfusion, you can use their schedule component and everything is right here, right out of the box. I thought that we will have to implement the date picker on our own and also views directive and view directive, but in this case, it is so much simpler than that. They make it work right out of the box. Great, and believe it or not, we are done with our first app, which is the calendar. So the next step is to switch to our Kanban board. If we go to the developed app, you can go right here and see that this is a Trello or a Jira clone. You can collapse any specific category and move around the tasks. This works perfectly, and we're going to implement it with Syncfusion. So we can go back to our app, go back to app right here, and then control-click Kanban so we can get started. To create our great Kanban component, the process is quite similar. So we can first import something known as a Kanban component, as well as the columns directive and a column directive. So this one is even simpler. There we go. And that is coming from add Syncfusion /EJ2-React-Kanban. We also need to import the data. So we can say import Kanban data as well as Kanban grid right here. And that is coming from /data/dummy. And we also need to import that header. So right here, import header from /components. There we go. Inside of here, we're going to also have that header and that div. So it might be a good idea to simply copy it from our calendar. There we go, just the div and the header. And we can paste it right here. And we need to close that div. There we go. So let's close it and save the file. We immediately have the calendar, but rather that's going to be a Kanban board, so we can rename it. Now, how do we go about creating this great looking Kanban board? Well, what we can do is render out our Kanban component like this. And inside of there, we're going to render our columns directive like so. Now, we want to loop over each individual column directive. So we're going to loop over our data, Kanban grid.map. For each item and also for each index, we want to return one column directive, singular this time. And that column directive is going to be a self-closing tag that's going to get the key equal to the index, as well as we're going to spread out the entire item like this. And as soon as we save that, you're going to notice that we have a few different, well, let's call them columns or categories. If we go into the Kanban grid data, you can notice that we have the header text, the key field, and the allow toggle. So we have to do, in progress, testing, and then done. But now we have to import the actual data. So let's give an ID to our Kanban component equal to Kanban. Let's also give it a data source equal to Kanban data. And that's going to get it populated. As you can see right now, we just have 0, 0, 0, which is not good. So what we have to do is we have to say card settings. And then inside of there, we can pass in the content field, which is going to be equal to summary, written like this. And we can also give it a header field, which is going to be equal to ID with a capital I. Now, if you save that and reload the page, now, as you can see, we still cannot see our actual items. So there's one crucial thing we have to do, and that is provide a key to each one of our data items, as we have a key inside of a map when we're working with React. So we can say key field is going to be equal to status. There we go. Now, if you save the file and reload the page, you should be able to see all of our items appear right here. We need to have one key field that is used to categorize all of our different elements. And also, we need to know what's going to be in the header and in the content field of each one of our cards. So we have task 1, task 3, and also we have the content field, which is the summary of the task. And now we can move it around. So this is looking great. And again, if I expand this, you'll see it is fully responsive and we can move our cards around and even collapse different categories. So this is looking great. Imagine that you're building a complicated dashboard application and you need to use all of these components inside of it. You'd be able to do that so easily using Syncfusion. So what we can do is collapse this and say that we're good to go with our Kanban board. It was that simple. And again, I just keep saying that it's great, but I'm really amazed with what Syncfusion's team is doing to make everything so simple and yet so effective. Now we're going to work on one of the most used components ever, and that is the what you see is what you get editor. That looks something like this. You have the editor with the text, and then you can apply a lot of different styles to that text: bold, italics, underlined, as well as all of the different styles, font sizes, orientations, and bullet points, and so much more, even images and code. So let's go ahead and start implementing our editor by going to our app and then control clicking the editor component. To start creating our editor, we can of course import some components, and these are going to be HTML editor, image, inject, link, quick toolbar, rich text editor, component, and finally just a regular toolbar. And these are coming from add Syncfusion /EJ2 React rich text editor like this. And we can also import the data, which is import editor data, and that's coming from /data/dummy, as well as import the header, which is coming from /components. There we go. And again, we need that div and the header, which we can copy from our Kanban component. So just take the div and take the header. We can go back to the editor and paste them here, as well as close our div. There we go. So immediately we can see this Kanban right here, but rather that's going to be our rich text editor. So how is this component going to look like? Well, we can render out our rich text editor component like this. And it's not going to be a self-closing component. We will have something inside of it. First of all, we'll have that inject, so we can add some services. And the services that we will add in this case will be the HTML editor, toolbar, image, link, and quick toolbar. There we go. So if you save this, you should immediately see this great looking editor, and you can immediately start typing and start making things bold, italic, or underlined. We can also change this into a heading or change the alignment, as well as add hyperlinks and also add images. So this is looking great. Right off the bat, I prepared some data just so we have something in there. So if you want to include that, feel free to do so. So we can just call the editor data as a self-closing component, and that's immediately going to import all the text inside of it. So we just have something to show. Great. And in case you want to have some data pre-populated here, we can add that editor data right here. That's a component that I prepared just in case you want to showcase everything that's possible right off the bat. But it looks like it jumps outside of our rich text editor component. Let's see. There we go. Now it's inside of there. And you can play with it. You can make it bold. You can change the alignment as well as make it into a heading. So this is looking great. But again, it's not necessary at all. You can just have it like this, empty at the start, and then the users can fill in the data themselves, and later on, of course, save it to the database. So again, I am amazed by how simply you can create already done components using Syncfusion. With Material UI, you would have to code something like this on your own, or you would have to find a third-party package, which in most cases don't work perfectly. Great. So that was our third app, and our fourth app is a color picker. That's quite an interesting one. We don't see them quite often, but whenever you have an application that requires some kind of theming, changing colors, it is quite useful to have a color picker like this, or even a more advanced one like this, where you can choose every single shade of every single color, as well as change the transparency. So this is looking great, and we're going to implement it right away. So we can close our editor and go to our color picker component. There we go. Believe it or not, to start coding out our color picker, we'll only need one single component. That's going to be import color picker component. And that's going to be coming from add Syncfusion /EJ2 React inputs. And of course, we're going to also need our header. So we can say import header. And then that's going to be from /components. Inside of here, we can again copy and paste that header component and a div. that we had in every single other app. So we can just copy it and paste it right here. There we go. So this is going to be a div, and this is going to be a color picker. There we go. So how is this actually going to work? Well, we have a div, we have a header, and we'll want to have one preview of this pen right here to see live change. And we'll also want to have an inline palette and an inline picker. So 2 different options. Let's start off by creating a div. And this div is going to have a class name equal to text-center. Inside of that div, we can have one self-closing div that's going to have an ID equal to preview. That's going to be our pen. And there we go. Since we already have our styles connected and we apply the ID of preview, we immediately get this pen. Now below that, we're going to have a div, and that div is going to have a class name equal to flex justify-center, items-center, gap-20, and flex-wrap. Inside of there, we can create one more div. And inside of that div, we're going to have a p tag. Right here, we can simply say inline palette. There we go. You can see the text right here. Let's give it some class names. Class name is equal to text-2xl, font-semi-bold, margin top or MT-2, and MB-4. There we go. That's going to be all that we need. So you might be wondering, how do we now create this great inline palette? The only thing you have to do is call a self-closing color picker component like this. There we go. And now we're going to provide a few props to it. First of all, we're going to provide an ID equal to inline palette. We're going to also provide a mode equal to palette with a capital P. We want to also provide a mode switcher, which is going to be equal to false, because we want to set up the mode ourselves and show 2 different ones. We want to show it inline. We don't want to show any buttons, so we can say show buttons is false. And that's going to be all that we need. Now, if you save this, you're going to see this amazing color palette right here. And now, what do we have to do to get to the second version, which is an inline picker? Well, let's simply copy this entire div and paste it below. Then let's change this to inline picker, and you can just change the mode to picker. It is that simple. And there we go. We have our inline picker right here, and it is working perfectly. And of course, you can use the output of these color pickers for anything you want. You can change some things, take the values, and then use them later on. In this case, we simply want to take the values to change the color of this pen, just to make sure that it is working. So what we can do is, above our functional component, we can say const change is equal to, where we get arguments to this function. And there, we want to say document.getElementById preview. So we want to take this div containing our pen, and then we want to say .style.background color is equal to arguments or args .current value .hex, as in hexadecimal. And we have to provide this change function right to both of our color pickers. Change is equal to change. Now, if you save this, you should be able to click right here, and as you can see, it actually changes color. So this is phenomenal. 2 incredibly custom color picker components right here in a few minutes. And that brings us to the end of our 4 apps. So we have our great looking dashboard, we have 3 pages and 4 apps. Before we dive into our charts, it might be a good idea to fix this theming issue. As we said, once you click on something, then you cannot see what page are you on. And usually it should look like this with a properly selected theme. So what we can do is we can finish implementing the theme selection. To do that, we can go back to our application, and then we can go to our app.js. Right here above our routes, we can call our theme settings component. I think we're importing it at the top. Let's just check. Yep, we're importing theme settings from components. So what we can do is we can simply render the theme settings component like a self-closing component. And now you can control click to go into it. This is where we're going to implement the possibility for users to choose between all different theming options, such as light and dark mode and 6 different colors. To start implementing our theme settings, we can first import a few icons that we're going to use. So we can say import MD outline cancel. And that's going to be coming from react-icons/MD. We can also import the BS check, and that will be coming from react-icons/BS. And finally, we need a tooltip component. So we can say import tooltip component, which is coming from at Syncfusion/EJ2-React-popups. There we go. We're going to also need some dummy data. So we can import theme colors, which will be coming from /data/dummy. There we go. And in this component, we of course have to change the global state. So once we change the colors in this component, we need our change to be seen across the entire application. So we can import use state context from /contexts/context provider. First, let's create the layout of our theme settings. We're going to have one root div. So right here, that div is going to have a class name equal to bg-half-transparent. Also w-screen for full width. It's going to be fixed. It's also going to have a nav item class, top 0, and also right 0. There we go. So if we save this, you can notice that nothing's going to happen right away, but we can add another div inside of it. And that div is going to have a class name equal to float-right, also h-screen. On dark mode, text-gray-200, bg-white. On dark mode, we want to have a custom color. So we can put square brackets right there and then say #484b52. And then finally, W-400. Now, if you save this, you'll be able to see that now we have this great looking sidebar on the right side, and we have just a darker window on the left side. So let's implement our sidebar for theme settings. We can add a div, and this div is going to have a class name equal to flex, justify -between, items-center, p-4, and ml-4 for margin left. Inside of there, we're going to have a p tag, and it's simply going to say settings. We can give it some class names to style it a bit, something like font-semi-bold and text-lg. Great. Now, next to that, we can have a button, and that's going to be the button to close the sidebar. So we can give it a few props, like type is equal to button. Also on click property, which is at the start going to be set to an empty callback function. We're going to implement the logic later on. We need to implement some inline styles. So I'm going to say style right here. And we can add the color. That color is going to be an RGB value. So right here, we can say something like 153, 171, and then 180. I found that color to work the best. And we can also give it a border radius of 50% to make it a circle. Of course, we cannot yet see it because we didn't put anything inside of it. So inside of that button, we can render the MD outline cancel. And there we go. Now you can barely see it on top, right? We can make it a bit bigger with class names. So let's say class name is equal to text-2xl. That's going to make it bigger. P-3 for padding. On hover, we want to drop shadow XL. That's going to have that shadow on hover. There we go. And also on hover, we want to change the BG to light gray. There we go. Okay, so this is looking more like it already. Now below this button and below this div as well, we can start creating our theme options. So let's create a div, and that div is going to have a class name equal to flex-col, border-t-1 for border top, border-color, padding 4, and ml-4 for margin left. There we go. Now we can see this line, which is a border top. And then inside of there, we can have a p tag that's going to say theme options. And we can have similar styles like we had in the settings. That's going to be font, semi-bold, and text LG. So we can copy those class names right here. But it should be a submenu, so we're going to leave it as LG, and we're going to change the settings to XL to make it even larger. There we go. So what are we going to have under our theme options? Well, we're going to have a div, and that div is going to have a class name equal to mt-4. We're going to have an input right inside of there, a self-closing input tag. This input is going to be of a type radio. There we go. We're going to give it an ID equal to light. Let's also give it a name equal to theme, a value equal to light with a capital L. A class name is going to be set to cursor-pointer so that we know that we can click it. And we're going to have an onChange property, which for now is going to be set to an empty callback function. We also need to know if it has been checked. So we're going to say checked. And there, again, we have to check if it is true or false. For now, simply let's leave it static as true. Now we need to add a label for that input. So we can create a label. And what we can do is say HTML4 is equal to light, and also give it a class name equal to ml-2, text-md, and cursor-pointer. Now, if we save this, it's looking a lot better, but we can copy this entire div, duplicate it below, and now we can change this to ID is equal to dark, value is equal to dark with a capital D, and also we want to change the HTML4 to dark, and also say dark right here. That's going to leave us with two different input tags or two different radio buttons. For now, they're not doing anything, but soon enough, they will change the color mode of our entire application. And just to see the finished product, we also need to add the theme colors just below. So to do that, we can copy this div right here with a p tag. That's going to be for the top border. But let's first find where is it ending. So it is ending right here. And then below it, we're going to simply add that new div and make sure to close it right away. There we go. So that's going to say theme options, but now we want to say theme colors because we're going to change the actual color. Now, what we want to do inside of here is create one more div below this p tag. That div is going to have a class name equal to flex as well as gap-3. Inside of there, we want to loop over all of our colors. And I've already prepared them for you inside of theme colors. That's a variable that we imported right at the top. So we can say theme colors and then dot map. We're mapping over them. We're going to get each individual item and also the index. For each one of these theme colors, we can instantly return a tooltip component. So we can say tooltip component, and a tooltip component is going to have its own key, which is going to be set to index, and also content, which is going to be set to item.name. And finally, a position, which is going to be set to top center. There we go. Now, if we save this, you cannot yet see anything because we don't have anything inside of that tooltip. So we can create a div element, and that div is going to have a class name equal to relative, empty-2 for margin top, cursor-pointer, flex, gap-5, and items-center. And inside of that div, we're going to have a button. This button is going to render a BS check icon inside of it. So that's going to be a self-closing icon, but we have to change the theme color depending on the current color. So let's say class name is equal to, we're going to make it a dynamic template string, and we're going to say ml-2, text-2xl, text-white. And then finally, we have to either show this or hide this depending on if the color we're currently on is the selected color. So we're going to have something like this. If item.color is equal to the current color, like this, in that case, we want to make this a block level element. So right here, we can say block. And then if that is not the case, we simply want to set this to hidden. So there's no check mark there. Great. But this current color, I don't think we have access to at the moment. That current color is something we'll have to get from the use theme context. So what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to simply say true right here. So it's always going to be visible. There we go. And now we actually have to style this button. So inside of this button, let's add a few props, like type is equal to button, class name is equal to h-10 and w-10, rounded-full to make it a circle, and cursor-pointer. There we go. So now we're going to have a few circles here, but they are invisible, as you can see. So what we can do is give them an inline style where we're going to say the background color is equal to item.color. And that's going to give each one of these a unique color, as you can see right here. We also need to add an on click on this button, which for now, as you already know it, is going to be set to an empty callback function until we implement the logic. And now we have check marks on all of them, but rather, let's say false here, so we have it on none of them. There we go. So when it comes to the UI and the layout, we are now done with this settings, theme options, and theme colors sidebar. Now we are ready to hook this up to our context and actually change the value so that they are changed across our entire application. To make the functionality work, let's pull out some states and state setters from our context. And we can do that by saying const. Let's get the set color, also the set mode, as well as the current mode and the current color, and finally the set theme settings. There we go. So we are trying to get that from use state context like so. Now, I'm pretty sure that we haven't yet implemented almost all of these, so we might want to revisit the state context. So if we go back to our context provider, you can clearly see that we're not passing these values in, but we can create them as we speak. So what we can do is create a few new use states. I'm going to expand our code editor a bit more, just so we can see everything. There we go. And I'm going to create a new use state field. So we can say use state snippet, and let's call it current color. Set current color, and at the start, we can use the string of hash 03C9D7. This is going to be the initial color. We can do the same thing for our mode. So we can say const current mode and set current mode, and we can set the current mode to be light, just so we have some default values. Finally, we also have to create setter functions. So we can say const set mode is going to be equal to a function that's going to accept an event. And there, we simply want to set the current mode to be equal to e.target.value, meaning the mode we clicked on. But we don't want to do just that. We also want to update the local storage. so that when the user comes the next time, the same color is activated. So we want to set item called theme mode to be equal to e.target.value. And now we can repeat this function, essentially just duplicate it below, but it's not going to be set mode anymore. It's going to be set color. So we need to have two different functions for mode and color. Instead of simply setting the current mode, we're going to set the current color. There we go. And then instead of theme mode, we're going to update the color mode. There we go. And now we have all of the values that we need to pass over to our context. So let's do that right away. We're going to pass in the current color as well as current mode. We can also pass the set current color and finally set current mode. Potentially we're going to have something else, but I think that's going to be it for now. So we have these four, and let's go back to theme settings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I think set theme settings is the last one, which we haven't yet used. So let's create that last one. That's going to be the last state. So we can simply create a new use state value, and we're going to call it theme settings. This is going to be a simple yes or no, a Boolean variable. So theme settings, and at the start is going to be set to false. So is this sidebar currently opened or closed? And now we can also pass this variable right here through our context. There we go. So now let's go to our theme settings and let's actually make use of these values. We can start with our first button, and that button is used to close our sidebar. So let's simply say set theme settings to false. That should allow us to close it. Now, the change we make here is reflected here, also reflected here, but most importantly, it's reflected inside of our app as well. So right here, we can get our theme settings. And then to actually hide it, what we can do is we can say dynamic block of code, theme settings, and. This means that we only show theme settings if it is currently true. So now if we reload, you're going to notice that it's simply not there. But now we have to actually open the sidebar when we click on settings. But now how do we get back to it? Well, we have to activate it once we click on this settings icon. So let's search for our settings, and it looks like it is right here. There we go, button settings. So right here on our settings, we have to turn it on. Let's add an on click. And we're going to call the function and set the theme settings to true. That is going to activate our sidebar. But of course, we also have to get this function from our context. So we need to pull the theme settings as well as the set theme settings. And it looks like I missed something right here. There's the button, class name, on click. Looks like I prematurely closed this button. So let's delete that sign, reload the page, and now click on settings right here. There we go. So now if we click here, we close it. If we click down there, we open it. So everything is working perfectly. Now let's actually make the toggles work. So what we need to do is go back into our theme settings and go to the next place where we have an empty function for now. And that's going to be in our first input. So right here on change, what we want to do is we want to call the set mode function. That's it. Just simply call set mode. That's the function that we have created inside of our context. So we call the set mode, and then the checked is not always going to be true. It's going to be if the current mode is triple equal to light. Only then it is true. And we can repeat the process for the other button. So right here, we can say simply set mode, and then checked is going to be if the current mode is triple equal to dark this time. There we go. So now you can see by default it is light, and that looks good. Now let's do a similar thing for colors. So we can scroll down and go to our button. Inside of our button, we simply want to set the color to be equal to, or rather call it with item.color. And now in here, instead of false, we can say if item.color is triple equal to current color. So we'll only see the check mark for the currently selected color, which is this one. Great. So now we can try to test out these functionalities. I'll try to expand this and click dark, but as you can see, nothing really happens. Also, nothing happens if I click the colors. So let's go ahead and debug that together. Let's try to make the theme color work first. First of all, once we click on a specific theme color, I'd want it to close the sidebar. So what we can do is go back to the context provider, and then immediately after we set a specific color, we want to close the theme settings as well. So right here at the bottom of both of these functions, we can set theme settings to false. There we go. And another thing is that we call these functions set mode and set color, and we're not actually calling these. We're calling the set current color and set current mode. So we actually have to pass these two into the context. There we go. So set mode and set color instead of the set current color and set current mode. So these are the right ones. There we go. Let me see. Set mode, we just need to add a comma right here. There we go. So now it should be a bit better. Let's see if it works. I'm gonna open up the theme selector or settings, and I'm gonna change to blue theme. And nothing seems to be happening. Okay, let's go step by step. So we are clicking on the color, right? Yeah, that's the color. Set current color. We're setting it to a specific color, setting the local storage, and then setting the theme settings to false. But it doesn't seem to be closing. Let's go to our theme settings and see if we're properly accepting it right here. We have the set color, that's correct. And then we're calling that set color right here on click on this button. So that looks good to me as well. But as you know, sometimes issues like these happen and you cannot immediately know what to do. But we can have a series of console logs and figure it out. So I'll try to open the inspect element and go to console and clear the entire terminal. I always like to include these bugs in just so you know how I would go about solving this specific problem. So let's go to settings and click right here. And we immediately get an error. Cannot read property of undefined reading value in context provider line 29. So let's go to our context provider, line 29, and it looks like target value is undefined. Interesting. Even though we're passing this set color, we're passing it right here, and we're calling it right here. So on click, we're passing in the item color. And it is undefined, even though it is right here. So what we can do is we can try console logging it. So I would go right here into set color, and I'm going to put a console log to console log the entire event. Or we can do e.target to be even more precise. And now I'm going to click on a specific color. As you can see, we get undefined. So that's not good. So let's go further. Let's go back into the theme settings. And let's make sure that we're properly calling this. We have an on-click property on this button, and we're calling the set color. That set color is coming from here, which is all right. And we're passing in the item.color. Let's try to expand this block right here. And once we expand it, we can put a console log right here as well. So we can say console log item.color to see if we indeed have it. Once I've done that, I'm gonna reload the page, open up the settings, and click right here. As you can see, we do get the color in theme settings. So the question is, why is it not getting properly transferred over to our set color? Okay, I think I've got it. We're passing in the item.color, which is a string, right? So we're passing in a string to this function. But then once we come back to the context provider, we are kind of thinking that we're going to get an event like this. And then we try to destructure the value from that event. But since this is already a string, there is no reason to do that. What we can do is immediately call this a mode. So I'm going to say mode here. There we go. And also we don't have to do any of this. There we go. So simply just pass in the mode. And similar thing for this. We're going to simply get the color immediately. And then we can simply set the color as it is. No need to destructure the value out of it. Great. Let's see if that's the same thing for our theme settings right here. In here, we are going to pass an event. As you can see, the difference between set mode and set color is that right here, we actually are passing the actual color. And above, we are simply calling the function, which means that we're going to get an event here. So I will have to go back and change this back to E. And then right here, e.target.value. There we go. So I think we should be good to go now. As you can see, small issues like these can definitely take some time to fix. So let's select the blue theme. And there we go. It automatically got closed and now it is selected. We can change to purple as well and that works. Same thing for red. And we can also change to dark. As you can see, the value was selected, but we cannot see anything in our browser. And that's because we now actually have to make use of these values. Let's first make use of the actual theme color. Remember, there were a few times where we simply typed the word blue. There we go. Blue, 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 blue. And that blue was actually supposed to be the real color. So what we can do is go to the top of this page and we can get the current color from our context. There we go. And now instead of that blue, we can actually use the current color, which is coming straight from our context. So that's going to be current color, not current context. My bad there. Current color, we're going to get that from here and also use it everywhere else where we used to type the word blue. There we go. I think that's going to be it for the navigation bar. Let's check it out. There we go. As you can see, we have red items right here. And if we switch to blue, they are blue now. Now let's repeat this process for the e-commerce page as well. So I'm going to go to the top. I'm going to say const current color, which is coming from, or rather is equal to use state context. And now I'm going to search for every instance of the word blue and simply replace it with the current color. There we go. So I think we should be good to go on this. And just one more. There we go. Now, if I expand it to see this in its full glory, we can close this as well. As you can see, we have our dashboard. And if we change our theme color to something like orange, you can see the buttons as well as the navigation bar changes. But now we can actually solve that bug where the item in the sidebar is not visible. So to fix that, we can go to our sidebar, right? Let's go find that sidebar and let's change the color of the currently active item. That should be somewhere around here, right? If we go to our nav link right here, we had the class name. We can also give it an inline style. And we already said that navlink is a special component belonging to React Router. So it allows us to call a callback function right there. And if we destructure the parameters inside of that callback function, we get the isActive property. Based on that, we can say if isActive, then show the current color like this. Or rather, we need to change the background color to be equal to the current color like this. Else, simply an empty string. We don't want to do anything. So I think that should be it. But of course, let's fix the syntax. I'm going to kind of divide this from the rest so we can see what's happening. We have if is active. I made a small mistake here. How it was actually supposed to go was right here. We want to instantly return an object with the styles. And then we want to set the background color to be equal to. And then if it is active, then it's going to be equal to the current color. Else it's going to be equal to an empty string. So this is how it should look. With this, it looks like we have an error. So let's go ahead and explore it. I don't think we ever imported current color in the sidebar. So at the top, we can right here get the current color from the context. You can see how easy it is now that the context is fully set up. And there we go. This is looking so much better. Now we can actually see on which page are we on. It is nicely highlighted in our theme color. We have our orders, employees, customers, calendar, Kanban, editor, color picker, everything else we have created so far, and this great looking theme color, which now can be changed. Great. I just noticed that our settings icon is actually blue, so we can change that. Let's just search for, again, the instance of the word blue. It is appearing right here inside of the app. So we can get the current color. And what we can do is change the background to the current color. And that should fix it right away. There we go. So this is looking so much better. Now everything is red, as you can see right here. And with that, we're done with our theming. At least when it comes to colors, we just have to do a few more things to make the theme options work as well. So stay tuned. To make our dark mode work, there's just one thing that we have to do, and that is add an additional class name to our div that's inside of the app.js. Let's give it a class name, and let's make it a dynamic block of code. We want to import, or rather get, something from our context, and that something is going to be current mode. So we can say if current mode is triple equal to dark with a capital D, then we want to have a string of dark, else we want to simply put the empty string as a class name. Now, if we save this and go to settings and switch to dark, as you can see, most of the components switch to dark, which is great. We also have the sidebar, everything else is dark, besides the background. So let's also fix that as well. We can scroll down to below our sidebar right here. This is the div that wraps our entire content. And in here, we have to change some things depending on our mode. So what we can do is we can expand this active menu right here into a few lines, just so it's easier to see what's happening. So we have, if the active menu is open, then just have some margin left, usually just flex 2. But now we're gonna add some additional class names. So on dark mode, we want to set this to bg-main-dark-bg. So we were missing this dark right here. And as soon as you change that, you're gonna get this beautiful interface that you can see right here. Everything is looking great. Of course, later on, we're gonna also change the background of this chart right here, so everything is fully customizable. Now, if we switch to some other pages, you're gonna notice that the actual background is dark, but the page and the content of the page is light. Of course, you can decide if you wanna make this black as well, but just for visibility reasons, I decided to keep the actual content light so that everything is nicely visible and uniform. Great. With that said, our dark mode is now done. Of course, we just have to make a few other changes when it comes to the chart backgrounds, but now is the time that we actually start implementing our charts. So of course, the first chart on our list is going to be the line chart. So I'm going to switch this to light, and we are ready to implement our first chart of the day. So let me just simply pull this on the side. We can go to our app, and we can open up our first line chart component. As you'll soon be able to see, it's not going to be hard as we're using Syncfusion components to help us. So let's get started. Inside of our line component, we're gonna have two imports. That's gonna be the charts header, as well as the line chart. And that's gonna be coming from // components. So as you can see right here, we are currently in the line component, or rather line page, but we're gonna create a separate line chart. So to start off, we can do the similar thing to what we have been doing in all pages, and that is creating the header. So we can say class name is equal to margin dash 4, on medium devices, margin dash 10, margin top 24, padding dash 10, BG dash white. On a dark mode, we can have BG dash secondary, dash dark dash BG, and rounded dash 3XL to create that paper look. Now we're gonna need our header. And I see that it imported the charts header right here, but just a regular header will do just fine. This is the header component we've created before. So what we can do is we can call the self-closing header component right here. We can give it a category, which is going to be equal to chart, like this. And we can also give it a title, which is going to be inflation rate. There we go. Now, if we save this, you're going to notice that we have this paper or this box wrapping everything, and then we have our header. Great. So below that, we can finally call our line chart. So I'm going to have a div. That div is going to have a class name equal to w-full. And finally, we're going to call our line chart self-closing component. There we go. Now, of course, to implement it, we can control-click to go into the line chart component. This is the first big chart that we're implementing, so we can start by importing some components from Syncfusion. Let's import the chart component. We also need the series collection directive. We also need the series directive. We need that inject to inject special services. Also, date time, the legend, and tooltip. You can essentially pick and choose whichever services you want your chart to have. And all of that is coming from at syncfusion/ej2-react-charts. We can also import the data for our chart by saying import line custom series, and we'll also need to get line primary y-axis and line primary x-axis. There we go. And that is coming from data/dummy. There we go. Now we can go ahead and check out what our series will have by control-clicking into it. As you can see, we have our data source and our line chart data, which is essentially just a list of points which we want to map over. So as you can see, our x-axis is going to be the date, and then y-axis is going to be a specific number. So what we can do is we can go back to our line chart, and instead of this div right here, we can render the chart component like so. There we go. If we save that, you're going to notice that we immediately get a chart right here, which looks great. Now, let's inject some services into it. So right inside of it, I'm going to simply say inject as a self-closing component. And we're going to say services is equal to an array. And then inside of that array, we're going to have our line series, date, time, legend, and finally the tooltip. And of course, the line series also has to be imported at the top. So let's get the line series right here and fix the typo on date time. And the legend right here should be singular. So if we fix that, we'll get our chart back and we're ready to start mapping over our data. So again, right below our inject, we can have our series collection directive. Inside of our series collection directive, which is spelled with a capital S, of course, because it's a component, we want to map over our data. So let's get our line custom series dot map. When mapping over it, we're going to get the item as well as the index right here. And we want to loop over one individual series directive. There we go. Now, each series directive is going to have a key equal to index, and then we want to spread over all of the data belonging to an item. Now, as you can see, this immediately gives us access to our data, and there are even some dots indicating significant points on the chart. So this is looking great. Of course, right out of the box, you can also trigger or show or hide specific lines in this line graph. But now let's customize it a bit. In our chart component, I'm going to give it an ID, line chart, just so we know what we're working with. Let's modify the height to something like 420 pixels. Let's also change the primary x-axis to our line primary x-axis. If we save that, you'll be able to modify each year specifically. Because if you don't do that, you're gonna just have some default values belonging to our data points. But once you actually implement that, you can modify each and every point on each axis. And we can repeat that process for primary y-axis as well. So if we save that, now we're gonna have percentages right here instead of just values. We can also remove the chart border. So what we can do is say chart area, and then we can pass in an object and say border, and then width of the border is going to be set to 0. So now we just have horizontal lines like this. We can also enable the tooltip by saying tooltip, and then an object saying enable is equal to true. So now if we hover over something, you can get more detailed, precise information about that specific point in time. So this is already looking so much better, and as you can see, it is incredibly customizable. What we can also do is we can import our context. So let's import our use state context coming from /contexts/context provider. And then we can use it as we usually do. That's going to be const current mode is equal to use state context, like so. And what we can do with that mode is we can change the background. So we can say background, and then we can check if current mode is equal to dark with a capital D, then we can change the chart color. So in this case, I found the color, the hexadecimal value of 33373E to work best. And if it is not a dark mode, then we can simply put FFF for white. Looks like we have a quick error. We were supposed to go outside of one more folder right here. So as soon as we fix that, that is now great. And we can also change the color to dark. And now, as you can see, we have a real dark mode. Of course, I would suggest playing more with values right here because the header text right here is not that readable, as well as these legend tooltips you can see on the bottom. Again, everything can be entirely customized. So let's go back to our light mode. There we go. And we can start with the area chart. The area chart is going to be the last chart that we're going to implement together. So if we go into the app and then if we click into the area, I'm going to show you how to do this chart as well. But all of the other charts are going to be incredibly similar. Essentially, you're going to use that same chart component belonging to Syncfusion. The only thing that's going to be changed is the type of the chart. So in here we have the line series, but elsewhere we're going to have area series and so on. I'm going to show you the differences between our line chart and our area chart, and I'm also going to show you how you can implement those for every single other chart on the list here. You'll be able to create them on your own, and I'll also give you the code for all of these charts right below this video. With that said, let's start implementing our area chart. Just to show you how easily you can change one chart style onto another, we're going to start with the area simply by copying everything we have so far for the line chart. So we can copy it, go back to the area and paste it. Of course, we're going to change the export default to area, as well as change the const right here to area, which is the name of our functional component. What we have to import at the top is going to be the chart component, of course. The series collection directive is going to stay the same, as well as the series directive. We're going to still inject something, and we're going to need the date and time, the legend as well. In this case, we won't need the tooltip, and we definitely won't need the line series, but we will need the spline area series. So that's the only difference right there. We're going to also import our header component. So let's say import header from // components. And we also are not going to get the line custom series. We're going to get the area custom series, as well as area primary y-axis and area primary x-axis. There we go. Now we can immediately change those right here. So this is going to be area custom series. And then right here, we're going to have area x-axis and area y-axis. There we go. And of course, we also have to have our div that's wrapping everything. So let's create that div right here. We can put our component inside of it. And then we can copy our header as well from our line component. We need this div alongside this header. Let's copy it and paste it right here. Looks like we got a small error. And in this case, we are naming the area primary y-axis and area primary x-axis with a lowercase a. So this was just a minor inconsistency on my end. Once we fix that, we can just go under the inject and remove the things that we don't need. So we won't be needing the tooltip. And instead of the line series, we're going to have our spline area series. There we go. Now, if we save this, as you can see, we have our new chart. We can immediately rename it right here to area. And also the title can be something like inflation rate in percentage. There we go. And look at this. This is a great looking area chart. You can also click right here to toggle specific data on or off, and it's looking great. So you just saw how simple it was to take one existing style of charts, or rather type of charts, and then implement a new chart with it. Syncfusion's components are incredibly extensible and modifiable. So we are using the same chart component, but this time we're switching it from a line chart to an area chart. This is looking great. Let's expand this to the full window so we can see it in its full glory. There we go. As you can see, the chart immediately expanded as it is fully responsive. On the sidebar, we can now switch between the area chart and the line chart, as well as all of the apps we have already created. This is already a phenomenal dashboard application. I would dare to say the best dashboard application on YouTube. So there are still 6 charts left to go, but as I've told you, the way in which you can implement them is incredibly straightforward. And here on JavaScript Mastery, I always like to put you to the test. So to finalize this application, I would like you to implement at least a few out of these 6 remaining charts. So what you can do is replicate the process for the line and the area chart to implement the bar, pie, financial, or any other chart. Again, reading through Syncfusion's docs is going to be crucial. You can give it a shot, and if you get stuck, the code for all of these charts is going to be down in the description. You're going to have access to a GitHub gist containing each one of these files individually, but I would strongly recommend you to check out the GitHub repository containing the entire code for the entire project. I entirely open source it, and you're free to use it for your own personal projects, even to make money off of them. So feel free to try it on your own, and then if you get stuck, check out the code and implement them with my help. With that said, our dashboard application is looking amazing. We implemented the homepage as well as the table pages, apps, and a few charts, as well as all theming functionality. We also have some icons at the top. Right now, they are not fully functional, as if you click on one of these, you're just gonna get this pop-up right here on the top right. But again, that is something that I strongly urge you to try out. We have been working with Syncfusion for the past few hours, but now is the time that you actually try and learn it on your own. We learn most when we try things on our own, get stuck, fix it, and then learn it forever. So I would urge you that after you're done with the charts, definitely give it a shot and try to get these pop-ups to work as well. You have the final deployed application right here as a reference guide. So this is how it should actually look like. Again, all of the code for these as well is down in the description with the entire project code. With that said, the last thing left for us to do is to deploy this amazing application for all of your potential employers, friends, and colleagues to check out, and so that you can put it on your portfolio to get a job. So let's go ahead and deploy it right away. Just before deploying it, I would just like to fix one small bug I've just noticed. If we collapse this a bit, you're gonna notice that everything goes blank. And I can replicate that by reloading the page and then opening the sidebar, moving it around a bit, and then kind of closing it and reopening it again. If we go to inspect and then console, you're gonna notice that the issue is with the spark line component, as nothing was returned from the render. I was unsure of what was happening here, but then I read Syncfusion documentation, and they actually suggest that you use a class-based component for the sparkline chart. So we can go to our sparkline component right here. And then again, down in the description, there's going to be the finalized code for the sparkline component, which is going to be almost the same as we have it currently, but now it is going to be a class-based component. If you do that and close the console, now you can resize it however you want. You can also close and reopen the menu, and everything will be working just fine. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, as I always want you to have finalized products and production-ready applications. Great. With that said, we are ready to get this application deployed. For deployment, we'll be using Netlify. Netlify allows you to deploy your React application in seconds. The only thing you have to do is log in. I'm gonna log in using GitHub. You'll be on your homepage. You can click Sites, and then scroll to the bottom, and then in here, you'll be able to drag and drop your React folder. In React applications, we cannot simply take all of the code right here, or just the source folder. We have to open up the terminal, stop it from running, and run npm run build. This command is going to create an optimized production build that we can then simply drag and drop into Netlify so that everything works perfectly. This process usually takes just about a minute, so I'm gonna pause this video and I'll be right back. There we go, our production build has been created, and you're gonna see a new folder in your File Explorer. Let's right click it, click Reveal in File Explorer, and the only thing you have to do is simply drag and drop the build folder right into Netlify. The deployment process is going to take about a minute, I would say, but that's not the case. As I was finishing my sentence, the app already got deployed. So before checking it out, let's expand this window and let's go to the main settings. In here, you can go to Options and then Edit Site Name. We can do something like Syncfusion Dashboard. Save. And there we go. Now we can go to Syncfusion Dashboard Netlify. Of course, that's going to be something different for you. And you're going to see that our app is now live and deployed to the internet. We can go and switch between different tabs, orders, employees, customers, calendar, Kanban, and all of that is entirely functional as we showed during development. That is phenomenal. With that said, we've came to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed building this phenomenal dashboard project, and there's even more great projects like this one coming up on JavaScript Mastery really soon. So if you haven't already, definitely make sure to subscribe. Once again, huge thanks to Syncfusion, not only for sponsoring this video, but also for creating such an amazing component suite with over 1,700 components that you can use in all of your upcoming React and all other kinds of applications. They're great and they are my personal recommendation. With that said, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.